The radio frequency had been classified, buried, and erased from every military database after 17 soldiers vanished using it 6 years ago. Nobody was supposed to know it still existed. But Captain Adrian Keller was watching his men die in a frozen trench with enemy forces closing from 3 sides and ammunition running to 0. So he opened the dead frequency. Echo 7, if anyone is listening, we need help. Static. Then a voice came through. Female, calm as ice over a grave. Echo 7 listening. Who needs me? Every soldier in that trench stopped breathing. Because they had just called something the military tried to erase from history, and it had answered. If this story pulls you in, stay with me until the very end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Firebase Kestrel died in 53 minutes, not because the soldiers were unprepared, not because they fought poorly. They fought the way men fight when something deep below conscious thought tells them that losing means dying. They used every round, every grenade, every desperate suppressive burst from positions that were already being flanked before the first contact report reached the duty officer. They fought with everything they had. They lost anyway. Now what remained of Captain Adrian Keller's unit occupied a shallow communications trench 200 meters east of the firebase's burned skeleton. 18 soldiers in a space designed for 8. 4 of them couldn't walk without help. 2 of them couldn't walk at all. Keller. Corporal Diaz's voice was flat. No panic left in it. Just information. Hicks is going into shock. Keller pressed himself against the frozen dirt wall of the trench and did not look up. He was processing everything his senses could collect simultaneously. The direction of the last muzzle flash. The interval between the mortar rounds. The angle of approach of the shadows moving through the storm to the northwest. At least 40 enemy personnel moving in disciplined bounds using the blizzard the way experienced soldiers use terrain. Keep pressure on it, Keller said. I know how to keep pressure on it, Diaz said. Then keep doing it. Sergeant First Class Torres crawled up beside him, belly in the snow, rifle across her forearms. She had a streak of someone else's blood drying across her left cheek, and she didn't seem to know it was there. Or she'd decided it didn't matter. Radio check, she said quietly. Still nothing. Command should have answered 20 minutes ago when we reported the firebase going hot, she said. I know what command should have done. Keller's jaw was tight. They should have answered 15 minutes ago when I declared emergency. They should have answered 10 minutes ago when I gave them a medevac request for 4 urgent surgical. Torres said nothing. The storm was killing the signal. Or the repeater went down when the firebase burned. Or there was a third option. Keller didn't say the third option out loud, not in front of the others. Torres lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. You think command already knows what happened here, and they're not answering on purpose. Keller looked at her. She held his gaze. We need to talk about extraction routes, he said. There are no extraction routes. Torres gestured with 2 fingers. Alpha Sector enemy movement confirmed 30 meters. Bravo Sector, I lost visual on Kowalski's fire team 6 minutes ago. No contact since. Presumed compromised. Charlie Sector. She paused. Charlie Sector is where the mortars are coming from. Keller looked down the trench. 18 soldiers, 4 who couldn't run, 2 who couldn't move. Approximately 40 rounds of rifle ammunition remaining per man, which sounded like enough until you factored in 40 enemy troops with armored support. It wasn't enough. A mortar round detonated 30 meters to their left. Snow and frozen earth rained down. Someone cursed. A wounded soldier made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Then Corporal Diaz spoke up from behind them. What about the old recon net? Keller turned. Diaz had his eyes on Hicks, watching the man's chest rise and fall with the shallow irregularity of early shock. But his voice was calm and specific in a way that meant he'd been thinking about this for a while. What about it? Keller said. Before we shipped out Martinez, the old comm sergeant, before he got rotated stateside, he told me something. Diaz paused. He said there's a frequency that command sealed off. Old recon band, pre-digital era. Said it was classified after some kind of incident. But the hardware we're running, the PRC-117s, they can still physically access it. It just requires a manual frequency override. Silence in the trench. Only the wind and the distant percussion of enemy movement. A sealed frequency, Torres said. Her voice was entirely neutral, which conveyed everything. He said sometimes people use it off-grid, people who don't want to be found. Diaz shrugged carefully. He said the call sign was Echo 7. Keller looked at the radio handset in his grip, the PRC-117G. 12 pounds of encrypted tactical communications hardware currently producing nothing but white noise on every authorized channel. You're telling me we should try a ghost frequency because a comm sergeant told you a story, Torres said. I'm telling you, we have no ammunition, 4 guys who can't run a storm that's eating our radio, and 40 enemy soldiers about to walk over us. Diaz finally looked up from Herix. His eyes were steady. I'm out of better ideas. Are you? Torres opened her mouth, closed it. She looked at Keller. Keller looked at the handset. A mortar round landed 20 meters away. Closer than the last one. The ranging shots were getting tighter. Whoever was coordinating that fire knew exactly where they were. Exactly. The thought dropped into Keller's mind like a stone into still water. He filed it. Walk me through the frequency override, he said to Diaz. It took 4 minutes to manually reprogram the frequency band on the PRC-117G. 4 minutes of Corporal Chen hunched over the radio housing with a multi-tool in the dark, while mortar rounds walked steadily toward their position. Their actual comm sergeant Petrov had caught a fragment burst in the initial firebase assault and was currently unconscious with a pressure bandage wrapped around his head. Chen was the closest thing to a specialist they had left. Chen worked without shaking. That was the thing Keller would remember later. The man's hands were absolutely steady. Done, Chen said. He handed the handset back. The frequency display read a string of numbers that didn't match any channel in the authorized communications plan. Numbers that existed in a sealed section of the electromagnetic spectrum. The storm screamed overhead. Somewhere in the darkness, enemy forces were 40 meters away and closing. Keller pressed transmit. Echo 7. He kept his voice low and flat. No desperation in it, even though desperation was the only honest word for what he felt. Echo 7. This is Kestrel Actual on Emergency Net. If anyone is listening on this frequency, we need help. 18 personnel, 4 urgent casualties. Grid reference, November Kilo 4732. Surrounded and low on ammunition. Requesting any available support. He released the button. Static filled the handset. The deep white hiss of an empty channel. Torres was watching him. Diaz was watching him. Every soldier in the trench who wasn't unconscious had their eyes on the handset in his grip. 10 seconds. 20. A mortar round hit 15 meters away. The shockwave knocked snow from the trench walls in a curtain of white. Herix groaned. Someone swore quietly. A single word delivered with the exhausted precision of a man who has run out of prayers. 30 seconds. Keller looked at Torres. She looked back with an expression that said she'd known this was a long shot. He pressed transmit again. Echo 7. This is Kestrel Actual. We are... And then the static changed, not disappeared. Changed. A subtle shift in the character of the noise. A compression in the frequency. The specific acoustic fingerprint of someone with their thumb on a transmit button before they speak. Keller had heard it 10,000 times over 16 years of military service. Every person in the trench heard it simultaneously. Every person in the trench went perfectly still. The voice that came through was female. Low. Unhurried in a way that was almost wrong for the situation. Like someone answering a phone call they had been expecting. Echo 7 listening. Who needs me? 4 words that somehow contained multitudes. Not crisp protocol. Not the panicked inflection of someone surprised to receive a transmission on a dead frequency in the middle of a winter firefight. Just 4 words. Calm as stone. Keller keyed transmit. This is Captain Adrian Keller, 43rd Recon Battalion Kestrel Firebase. We have 18 personnel trapped in a communications trench at the coordinates I transmitted. 4 urgent casualties. Enemy force of approximately 40 personnel with armored support advancing on our position. We are critically low on ammunition and unable to extract. He paused. I don't know who you are or how you're on this frequency, but we need help. Silence for 3 seconds. Copy all Kestrel Actual. A pause. I have eyes on your position. Another pause, shorter. I can help you, but I have conditions. Conditions, Torres said very quietly beside him. Keller raised one finger. He keyed the handset. State your conditions. The response came without hesitation. As if the words had been prepared for a long time, rehearsed against the possibility of exactly this moment. First condition, you do not ask my location. You do not attempt to track this transmission. You do not send anyone to find me before, during, or after. Keller waited. Second condition, you follow my instructions without questioning them. If I tell you to move, you move. If I tell you to stop, you stop. If I tell you a route is dangerous, you trust me. Another pause. Third condition, when this is over, you forget the frequency. You forget this conversation. You never transmit on this band again. The static held the shape of that silence. Keller looked at Torres. She made a small gesture. Your call. The exactness of someone who understood this was not her decision, and was relieved it wasn't. He looked at his soldiers. Diaz, with his arm still braced under Hicks's tourniquet. Chen, clutching the radio housing. The faces along the trench wall pale in the darkness, watching him with the specific expression of people who have run through all available options and arrived at the end of the list. A mortar round landed 12 meters away. Accepted, Keller said into the handset. All three conditions. You have my word. Static. Then, get your people ready to move. You'll hear me working in approximately 12 minutes. What does working mean? It means when you hear the first shot, you start moving north-northeast bearing 045. Don't stop for anything. North-northeast puts us through the enemy line. I know where the enemy line is, Captain. Keller stared at the handset for a moment. Copy. 12 minutes. The channel clicked off. Just static again. The anonymous white noise of a dead frequency, as if the voice had never been there at all. Torres was already moving. She had Ramirez and Ua pulling the two immobile casualties onto improvised Litter's rifle slings, knotted between stocks and barrels, the oldest field expedient in the infantry handbook. She was doing it without being told, which was why Keller trusted her more than almost anyone he'd served with. You believe her, Diaz said quietly close to Keller's ear. Keller didn't answer immediately. He was watching the darkness to the northeast, the precise bearing Echo 7 had given him, trying to read what was there. We have 12 minutes to not get killed by mortars, he said finally. What I believe doesn't matter that much right now. Fair point. Get Hicks ready to move. 8 minutes passed. They felt like hours. They felt like something measured in heartbeats rather than seconds. Each one a separate decision made and survived. Keller moved through the trench, checking each soldier. Bandages, ammunition count, mobility assessment. A quiet word for the ones who needed it. Silence for the ones who needed that instead. Private First Class Yamamoto had a wound in his left leg that had been dressed and redressed twice in the last hour. He would be slow. He would be a liability in any situation that required running, and every situation in the next 12 minutes was going to require running. Can you move? Keller asked him. Sir? Yamamoto's voice was tight with pain, but not fractured by it. Where are we going? North-northeast, through the line. Yamamoto looked at his leg, looked at Keller. Yeah, he said. I can move. Torres appeared at Keller's shoulder. Litters are ready, 2 on each. I've got Ua and Reyes on one. She caught herself. Reyes and Martinez on the other. Keller noted the hesitation, the name she'd started to say, and pulled back. Not the time. Bearing 045, he said. First shot we move. Keep it tight. 5-meter spacing. Weapons out. We do not stop for contact. We do not return fire unless we have absolutely no choice. He paused. The objective is the tree line at the far side of that bearing. Any questions? No one spoke. In his experience, no questions meant one of two things. Either his soldiers understood the plan perfectly, or they had moved beyond questions into something older and quieter. The place where you just do the thing because it is the thing to be done. 2 minutes, Chen said, watching his watch. Keller positioned himself at the forward edge of the trench. He could see enemy muzzle flashes through the storm now, closer than before. 40 trained soldiers, armored support somewhere behind them, a mortar team with ranging data that was disturbingly accurate for a blizzard. versus 18 exhausted troops, 4 of them on litters moving through the enemy line in the dark. He pushed the math out of his head. The math didn't help. 1 minute. The radio crackled faintly. The carrier wave. The pre-speech compression. No words. Just presence. And then the shot. It came from somewhere impossibly far away. From a direction that made no tactical sense. From a position that should have been inaccessible given the terrain and the storm. A single crack that cut through the wind with the particular acoustic sharpness of high-powered precision fire. Not the flat distributed sound of a rifle. The specific report of a cartridge designed to reach out across distances that most soldiers would describe as impossible. An enemy soldier at the far northwestern edge of the advancing line dropped straight down. No stumble, no spin, just down. The echo was still moving through the valley when the second shot came. Another enemy soldier, eastern sector, a team leader based on his position and movement pattern. Down. Then a third. Then something extraordinary happened. A tracer round arced across the darkness, burning phosphorus white against the black sky. It did not come from the enemy position. It came from the northeast, from the exact direction Echo 7 had told them to move, and it traced a long glowing line through the storm that touched the earth 200 meters ahead of the trench and burned briefly in the snow. A phosphorus marker, a finger pointing. Here, this way. Follow this. Move, Keller said. They moved. Later, Keller would not be able to reconstruct the next 6 minutes with any reliability. Memory under extreme stress does not record events in sequence. It records impressions, fragments of sound and image without temporal order. What he could reconstruct afterward was a series of disconnected images. Torres's silhouette in the snow moving fast and low. The weight of Yamamoto's arm across his shoulders half carrying him across the frozen ground. The burning tracer line ahead of them, the only fixed point in the world. The shots continued regular, spaced, each one placed with a specificity that Keller himself, a qualified marksman with more trigger time than he could count, recognized as something beyond normal training. The precision wasn't just technical, it was architectural. The unseen shooter was not simply eliminating targets. She was reshaping the battlefield. Collapsing the enemy's command structure by removing specific nodes. Creating gaps in the line exactly where Keller's unit needed to pass. Through the chaos, he could hear enemy radio chatter. Indistinct, agitated. An officer receiving reports that didn't make tactical sense and trying to reconcile them. They couldn't find her. They were firing into the storm in multiple directions. No coherent target acquisition. Litters first, Torres hissed. Owa and Reyes went through the gap at a dead sprint, bent low knees churning through knee-deep snow. The second pair followed. The carrying was brutal work in the cold and the terrain, and Keller watched both pairs move through the gap with the focused attention of someone watching a needle thread itself through a hole that was closing. They made it. Then the rest. Chen with his radio housing, Diaz with Hrix leaning against him, Yamamoto moving on his own with his jaw locked around whatever pain was climbing up his leg. One by one through the gap. Through the brief, terrible exposed space between the enemy's broken flanks into the darkness on the other side. A mortar round hit behind them, 30 meters back. Directly on the trench they had just abandoned, the concussive wave rolled over Keller from behind a giant's hand, pressed flat against his back, staggering him 2 steps forward. He didn't fall. He ran. The tree line was ahead. 50 meters. 40, 30. He was through. He stopped against a tree trunk, gasping in air that tasted of pine sap and cold, and the faint chemical odor of propellant. Around him, his soldiers were doing the same thing. Stopping. Breathing. The shaking hands that come when adrenaline begins its recession and the body realizes it might survive. The radio crackled. "You're alive because they're looking for me." The voice said it quietly, almost amused but not quite. Something more complicated than amusement. "Keep moving north through the trees. There's a frozen creek bed 200 meters ahead. Use it as a covered route. It'll take you northeast toward the valley floor." "Copy." Keller's breath came in visible clouds. "Who are you?" A pause. "You agreed not to ask questions." "I didn't ask where you are. I asked who you are." A longer pause. Then, "Someone who knows what this feels like." The channel clicked. Keller stared at the handset. Torres was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. "North through the trees," he said. She nodded. They moved. The frozen creek bed was exactly where Echo 7 said it would be. That was the detail that lodged in Keller's mind as they descended into the shallow ravine and moved in single file through the darkness. Not the shooting extraordinary as the shooting had been. Not the tracer guidance which had been tactically brilliant. What stuck in his mind was the terrain knowledge. Specific granular familiarity with a patch of frozen wilderness that a random, isolated shooter should not possess. Whoever she was, she knew this valley. She had been here before. Many times, possibly. Long enough to know the creek bed, the tree lines, the angles of approach, the covered routes. Long enough to know the positions from which an enemy command structure could be systematically dismantled. He filed it. Not the time. The column moved along the creek bed for 15 minutes without contact. Through the trees, he could hear the enemy force reorganizing. Shouted commands, vehicles repositioning. The sounds of an operation that had encountered unexpected friction and was reassessing. Reassessing. Not pursuing. "She's still working," Diaz said from behind him. Keller listened. He could hear it now. Distant shots spaced irregularly from multiple directions. The same architectural precision, but applied to the pursuit force. Keeping it reactive. Keeping its attention fractured. She was moving between positions, not stationary. Every time she fired, she moved before the echo died, using the storm and the terrain as cover. Staying ahead of the counter-tracking the enemy would inevitably try to run against her. "She's holding them," Torres said quietly. "While we run?" "Yes." "How long can one shooter do that against 40? Keller didn't answer. They reached the base of the valley 40 minutes after exiting the trench. The terrain opened up here. Flatter ground. Visibility improving marginally as the topography blocked the worst of the wind. 200 meters across open ground, Keller could make out the shape of a collapsed farmhouse stone walls, still standing to shoulder height. He keyed the radio. "Echo 7 were at the valley floor. Grid reference November Kilo 4911, requesting guidance on extraction options." The response was slower this time, 12 seconds before the carrier wave clicked in, which was 12 seconds longer than before. "I need you to listen carefully, Captain." The tone had shifted. Something in the flatness of it had acquired an edge. Not urgency exactly, more like significance. "Do not go to Rally Point Zulu," Keller frowned. He had not mentioned Rally Point Zulu. He had not mentioned any rally point. "Say again?" "Rally Point Zulu. The extraction point command will order you to use." A pause. "Do not go there." Another pause. "That landing zone is a kill box." The words landed in the valley with the weight of something that had been calculated and prepared before being spoken. Not an emotional statement, not a guess or a fear. A tactical assessment delivered with the confidence of someone who had evidence they hadn't shared yet. Keller stood very still. "How do you know about Rally Point Zulu?" Static held the silence. "Because the ambush that destroyed your firebase wasn't random." The voice came back steady and cold. "Your position was leaked, Captain. Someone inside your command network fed your coordinates to the enemy." The creek murmured under its ice. Wind moved through the spruce trees above them. Somewhere far away, a shot echoed. Echo 7 still working, still buying them time. "That's a serious accusation," Keller said carefully. "Yes," she said. "It is." "What's your evidence?" "The mortar targetings was too precise for a blizzard engagement. Your firebase was hit within 3 minutes of the storm reaching peak intensity when your air support was grounded and your communications were degraded. That's not luck. That's timing." A pause. "And the ambush pattern mirrors a classified patrol schedule that should only exist in 3 places: your Firebase Records Battalion S2 and the Operational Planning Cell at Command." Silence. "The enemy knew not just where you were, they knew when you'd be most vulnerable. That information didn't come from a scout drone." Keller turned to look at Torres. Torres's face had gone very still in the way that meant she was processing something she did not want to accept. "She's saying someone sold us," Torres said quietly. "She's saying someone sold us," Keller confirmed. "And that Rally Point Zulu is where they're waiting for the survivors." Torres looked out across the valley toward the dark shapes of the mountains. She was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe her?" Keller turned it over. He thought about the mortar ranging, how fast it had found them, how accurate it had been in conditions that should have made precision targeting nearly impossible. He thought about the 40 enemy soldiers who had known their exact defensive setup. He thought about the timing of the storm, the firebase, the simultaneous collapse of their communications. He thought about Echo 7 calling Rally Point Zulu a kill box without hesitation. The specificity of it, the confidence. He keyed the radio. Echo 7, if Rally Point Zulu is compromised, where do we go? A pause. I'll guide you to a secondary landing zone off the command network. Extraction assets will need to be contacted directly, not through the battalion net. That bypasses command authority. Yes. If I do that, I'm potentially burning my career and possibly facing court-martial charges. Yes. A beat. But you'll be alive to face them. Keller stood in the valley with the frozen creek at his feet and 18 soldiers behind him, and a voice on a dead frequency ahead of him asking him to make a decision on intelligence he couldn't verify from a source he couldn't identify against an authority structure that might be actively trying to kill his people. He thought about the 2 soldiers on litters. He thought about Yamamoto's leg. He thought about the look on Torres's face when she said someone sold us. He thought about the mortar round that had landed directly on the trench they had just evacuated, landing exactly where they had been. Give me your secondary landing zone coordinates, he said. Copy, Echo 7 said, and somewhere in the dark mountains above them, the distant sound of rifle fire continued. A lone shooter holding the perimeter of their survival against 40 soldiers alone in a blizzard on a frequency that was supposed to be dead. Buying them time. Still working. The coordinates Echo 7 provided placed the secondary landing zone in a box canyon 7 kilometers northeast, accessible only through a narrow mountain pass that would be brutal terrain for a unit carrying wounded. Torres unfolded the terrain map against the creek bank and studied it for exactly 4 seconds. That's a 4-hour movement in these conditions, maybe 5 with the litters. She folded the map. Her jaw was tight. Hicks needs surgery, not in 4 hours. Now. He's got maybe 2 hours of stable before... I know Torres. She looked at him. What do we tell the soldiers? Keller considered it for a moment. The truth, he said. The complete truth, she said. Including the part where someone in command may have sold our position. No, not that part. He met her gaze. We tell them the primary extraction point is compromised and we're using an alternate route. We tell them it's going to be hard. We tell them we're going to make it. He paused. And if we don't make it, then it won't matter what we told them. Torres was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You know, for a man who just staked 18 lives on a ghost story, you're remarkably calm. I'm not calm, Keller said. I'm committed. There's a difference. He keyed the radio one more time. Echo 7, we're beginning movement to the secondary LZ. We have wounded who need extraction within 2 hours. A pause. Can you maintain cover for us while we move? The response came after a moment, and in the silence before it arrived, Keller became aware that the distant rifle fire had stopped. Not gradually, simply stopped all at once as if a switch had been thrown. The absence of it was loud. I can maintain cover, Echo 7 said. But Captain... A pause. The enemy commander has identified my general operating area. They've split forces. Half of them are still looking for you. The other half... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. They're coming for you, Keller said. That's what I've been counting on, she said. Before he could respond to that, before he could process what she meant or what it cost her to say it, with that particular calm, she spoke again. One more thing, Captain. When command contacts you, and they're going to order you to Rally Point Zulu. They're going to tell you it's secure. They're going to make it sound like the only option. A pause. And they're going to know you spoke to someone on this frequency. They're going to ask you about Echo 7. What do I tell them? The static held the silence for a long moment. Tell them Echo 7 doesn't exist, she said quietly. Tell them you've been alone out there the whole time. The channel clicked off. Keller stood there with the handset and did not move for 3 full seconds. Around him, 17 soldiers were watching him with the exhausted patience of people who had stopped expecting easy answers and were simply waiting for a direction. Form up, he said. We move in 2 minutes. He looked up at the mountains, at the dark ridgelines and the blizzard-obscured slopes where Echo 7 was moving alone between positions, drawing fire and splitting enemy forces. He didn't know who she was, didn't know what had put her in these mountains operating on a dead frequency with the kind of terrain knowledge and tactical proficiency that his unit's survival now depended on entirely. Didn't know what the sealed incident was, the classified disaster that had buried the frequency 6 years ago, or what part she'd played in it. All he knew was that she was out there, working for them, for soldiers she had never met, on behalf of a military that apparently wanted her erased. They started moving. 43 minutes into the movement, the battalion radio came alive. Not the sealed frequency, the primary net, the authorized channel that had been dead since the firebase fell. It crackled with the particular quality of a signal that had been trying to reach them for a long time, and had finally found a gap in the terrain. Kestrel, actual, this is Paladin 6. Do you read? Keller stopped. Around him the column halted. Soldiers dropped to their knees in the snow. The litter teams grateful for even 30 seconds off movement. He looked at the handset. Paladin 6, Major Carver, the battalion operations officer. A man Keller had known for 8 years. Careful, precise, attentive to protocol. An officer who had access to the operational planning cell. Who knew about Rally Point Zulu? Who would have been one of 3 people with access to the patrol schedule that Echo 7 had described. Keller looked at Torres. Torres very carefully did not look back at him. He keyed the primary net. Paladin 6 Kestrel Actual. We read you loud and clear. Kestrel Actual, thank God. The relief in Carver's voice sounded genuine. Completely genuine. What's your status? We lost comms hours ago. We've been trying to... Firebase Kestrel is destroyed. 18 survivors, 4 urgent casualties. We're currently mobile, moving toward a... Keller paused. Moving toward a safe location. What's your current grid? Keller looked at the map. He looked at the ridge saddle they were standing on. At the terrain between here and the secondary landing zone. At the 7 kilometers of frozen wilderness that stood between his wounded soldiers and a helicopter that might or might not exist. He gave Carver a grid reference. A false one. 3 kilometers south of their actual position, a valley floor with no tactical value, no cover, no approach. Copy grid, Carver said. Kestrel Actual, we're dispatching extraction assets to Rally Point Zulu immediately. You need to make for Rally Point Zulu, bearing 275 from your position approximately. We can have assets on the ground in... We can't make Rally Point Zulu, Keller said. Too much enemy contact between us and that position. A pause on the other end. Short, calculating. Kestrel. Actual, we have intelligence that enemy forces in your area have been neutralized. Rally Point Zulu is secure. This is a direct order. Negative Paladin 6. Keller kept his voice level. We have on-the-ground intelligence that contradicts that assessment. We're proceeding to an alternate extraction point. I'll provide coordinates once we're established and secure. A longer pause. When Carver's voice came back, it had changed. The relief was still there, but underneath it, something else. A precision. A specificity that felt less like concern and more like calculation. Captain Keller, I need you to listen to me carefully. Proceeding to an unauthorized extraction point is a court-martial offense. You need to follow this order. Understood, sir. Keller looked at Torres. We'll discuss it when we're out. He turned off the primary net. Torres stared at him. You just refused a direct order from a major. Yes. On the word of a voice you've never met. Yes. She held his gaze for 2 full seconds. Then she turned and signaled the column forward without another word. That was Torres. When she made her decision, she made it completely. They reached the box canyon at 0300 hours. The last kilometer had been the worst. A steep descent through broken terrain in total darkness. Litter carriers working in shifts. Yamamoto keeping pace on his own, which was either a miracle or a kind of stubbornness that refused to be categorized as either. The canyon floor was flat and wide enough for a medium helicopter. Keller called it out immediately. 50 meters clear. Hard-packed snow. No major obstacles. He keyed the sealed frequency. Echo 7, we're at the secondary LZ. Grid reference November Kilo 5147. Requesting confirmation of extraction assets. Static. A long silence that was different from before. Not the waiting silence with the pre-speech compression, just static. Keller felt the first cold thread of real dread moving through him since the firebase. Echo 7, nothing. Echo 7, come in. Then the carrier wave appeared, faint. Further away than before, as if the transmitting radio were at great distance. The voice when it came was the same flat calm, but something in the background had changed. Wind. Not the distant howl of the blizzard, but the close, immediate blast of wind hitting a radio held in the open in an exposed position. Kestrel actual. She was breathing slightly harder than before. I've arranged for a civilian contractor helicopter, call sign Raven 4. They're on approach from the south. ETA approximately 16 minutes. They're expecting your grid. Copy. A pause. Echo 7. What's your situation? Silence. My situation is fine, Captain. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving you. You said they split forces. Half were coming for you. Half of 40 is 20. I've handled worse. The wind in the background of the transmission was very loud. Come to the LZ, Keller said. We have 16 minutes. You can make this position in 16. I can't. The two words landed simply. No drama in them. No self-pity. Just fact. Why? A pause. Then, because they're between me and you. Another pause. And because, this is how it works, Captain. Keller stood in the box canyon with his wounded soldiers around him and 16 minutes on the clock, and a voice telling him she was cut off and surrounded and saying it like she was reporting a weather condition. I'm not leaving you here, he said finally. You don't have a choice. You have 4 people who will die if that helicopter doesn't get them to a surgeon. You have 14 other people who've been through a bad enough night. A pause. Get your people home. At least tell me your name. The static held the silence for a long time. The wind howled through the transmission. And then before she answered, before the voice came back through the dead frequency, a sound arrived from somewhere in the mountains above the canyon. Not a shot. The sound of engines. Multiple vehicles. Moving without lights. Moving toward the canyon. Torres grabbed his arm. They didn't need to track us. She said, her voice very low and very controlled. They knew where we were going. The primary net handset crackled in Keller's vest pocket, the one he'd turned off, except he hadn't turned it off completely. In the cold and the dark on the ridge saddle, he had reached for the dial and turned something. But the handset had been transmitting his position the entire time. Every meter of the 7-kilometer march through the mountains. Every turn. Every pause. Right to the secondary LZ coordinates Echo 7 had given him. Right to the box canyon. He understood it all in 1 second. And it was already too late. The engines were closer now. He could see faint blue-white glow of instrument clusters through gaps in the canyon walls. His soldiers were looking at him. Hrix was delirious on his litter. Yamamoto had his weapon up. Torres was already moving the litters toward the south wall, toward the deepest shadow, buying them seconds. Raven 4 was 14 minutes out. The force that had just found them was going to be inside the canyon in approximately 4. He keyed the sealed frequency. Echo 7, they found us. They tracked the primary radio. We're at the secondary LZ with approximately 4 minutes before contact. His voice was steady. He made it steady. If you're still out there, we need you one more time. The static held. 3 seconds that felt like 3 minutes. Then the canyon entrance exploded with light. Not the vehicles. Something else. A single brilliant flash from the ridgeline above the southern wall. A muzzle signature so brief it was almost imaginary. And the lead vehicle lurched hard to the left and stopped. The engine changed from a purposeful growl to a high mechanical whine, and then silence. No one in the canyon moved. Then the second shot came, and the second vehicle's front axle dropped into the snow as both front tires deflated simultaneously. A precision double tap that Keller had never seen executed outside of a controlled range environment, let alone in a blizzard at night from an elevated position against moving targets. The vehicles behind the disabled lead truck had no room to maneuver. 2 disabled vehicles created a complete choke point at the narrow canyon entrance. The pursuing force was stopped. Not destroyed. Stopped. buying time with the same cold economy that had characterized every decision Echo 7 had made in the last 2 hours. "She's still working," Diaz said from somewhere behind Keller. "South wall. Everyone against the south wall, weapons up. Watch the canyon rim. They'll try to flank through the high ground." He turned to Torres. "Get the litters to the lowest point of the canyon floor. Already moving." The radio remained silent on the sealed frequency. Just the white noise of an empty channel and the distant sound of shouting from beyond the disabled vehicles. 13 minutes to Raven 4. A burst of automatic fire raked the canyon wall 8 feet above Keller's head. Not aimed. Suppressive. Probing. The rounds struck rock and threw sparks, and the echo rolled around the canyon walls before it died. "Contact high, 11 o'clock, Chen called, a figure on the western canyon rim. Then 2 more. They had sent scouts up the outside and were moving along the ridgeline, trying to get a firing position down into the floor. "Yamamoto Reyes western rim engage." Both soldiers opened up in short controlled bursts, and the figures on the rim scattered back. One of them fell, caught the rim itself, hung for a moment, then pulled back out of sight. Not dead, just dissuaded, for now. Keller ripped the primary net radio from his vest and thumbed the battery release. Too late to matter. They were already here. But he was not going to keep broadcasting. He counted 12 enemy personnel visible from his position. Dismounted troops working around the disabled vehicles, moving with the deliberate spread of soldiers preparing a coordinated assault. Using the vehicles for cover while flanking elements, tried to establish the high ground. The high ground was the problem. Once they had shooters on both canyon rims, the floor became indefensible, regardless of ammunition or positioning. They had maybe 8 minutes before that happened. Raven 4 was 11 minutes out. The math was simple, and it was terrible. He moved to Torres's position at the southern wall. "Talk to me about options." "Options," she said with the tone of someone asked to describe a menu at a restaurant that is on fire. She scanned the terrain. Northern end of the canyon, boulder field about 60 meters out. Natural cover, broken ground. If we can get the litters there, they have some protection from the rim. She paused. But moving 60 meters with enemy dismounts working around the choke point means we're exposed for approximately 90 seconds. 60 meters of open ground. 4 soldiers on litters. 14 others running on fumes. "What's covering the move?" "Nothing," Torres said. Then the sealed frequency crackled. Both of them turned. The carrier wave came in faint but clear. And then the voice, same flat calm, same unhurried delivery. But the background was different now. Close wind. The kind of closeness you get when you're moving, when the transmitting antenna is being carried through open terrain rather than held steady at a firing position. She was moving. "I can cover your movement to the northern boulder field," the voice said, "but I need 3 minutes to reach an angle." "We don't have 3 minutes. 2 then." Keller looked at the rim. The enemy scouts had pulled back, but they'd be trying again, and the next attempt would be better coordinated. 2 minutes. Maybe it would have to be. "Get your people ready to move on my signal," Echo 7 said. "When I fire you, move immediately. Don't wait. Don't look for me. Don't slow down for anything." "What's your signal?" "You'll know." The channel clicked. Torres was already relaying the movement order in the quiet, precise shorthand she and the soldiers had developed over months. Hand signals, whispered words. The information passing down the line with the speed of something rehearsed which none of this had been and yet somehow resembled. Keller checked his rifle. 22 rounds remaining. He counted the enemy he could see. 7 near the vehicles. 2 confirmed on the western rim. At least 2 more on the eastern rim. The litter teams were ready, heads down watching him waiting. 1 minute passed. The enemy on the rim was visible again. More of them. 3 confirmed on the western edge, trying to establish a prone position with a clear angle down to the canyon floor. When they got settled, when they got their sights aligned, the floor would become a shooting gallery. Keller raised his rifle. "Yamamoto!" Both of them opened up simultaneously, forcing the rim figures to break position. It worked. It would keep working for maybe 30 more seconds before the enemy adapted. Then the signal came. A single shot from the southern ridgeline above and behind the canyon's south wall. A position that Keller's tactical mind immediately categorized as impossible, because reaching that ridgeline from Echo 7's last known area of operation in the time available required either an intimate familiarity with the terrain that went beyond anything normal or a physical output that defied reasonable calculation. The lead enemy scout, who had been establishing his position on the western rim, pitched backward and disappeared. The enemy reaction was instantaneous. Every head went down. Every shooter pulled back from exposed positions. "Move," Keller said. The 60 meters to the boulder field was the longest 60 meters Keller had covered since a street clearance operation 3 years ago that he still occasionally dreamed about. The litter teams went first. Keller running alongside Uwa's pair, his rifle up even though running degraded his accuracy to nearly nothing. Behind him, the rest of the unit following in the loose spread Torres had organized. Weapons out, moving fast. 2 more shots from the southern ridgeline during the movement, both aimed at the eastern rim. Both effective, both arriving at the exact moments when his unit was most exposed. As if the shooter above could see precisely where they were and what they needed. She had eyes on the canyon. She'd had eyes on this canyon from the beginning. They reached the boulder field. Litters into the deepest cover. Soldiers dropping behind rocks, weapons oriented outward. Keller pressed himself against a boulder and did a head count. 18. All 18. 8 minutes, Chen said. 8 minutes to Raven 4. From the disabled vehicles, a new sound developed. The metallic clatter of a crew-served weapon being assembled. Something crew-operated and mounted. Once they got it operational, once they brought it to bear on the boulder field, the tactical equation of the canyon would change in a fundamental and final way. He keyed the sealed frequency. Echo 7, they're setting up a crew-served weapon at the canyon entrance. If that comes online... "I hear it," she said. "Can you address it?" A pause. "I'm almost out," she said. 3 words. No drama. Just a tactical status report. Almost out of ammunition. The resource that had held 40 enemy soldiers at bay through a blizzard and a 7-kilometer running fight through mountain terrain was nearly gone. "How many rounds?" The pause before she answered was brief and clipped. "Enough." Before he could respond, the single shot came from the ridge. The crew-served weapon assembly stopped. He didn't want to think about the geometry of that shot. The angle. The range. The specific target among a cluster of soldiers working in the dark on a weapon that hadn't been fired yet. She had found that person in the dark. From a distance, most snipers would walk away from. 6 minutes, Chen said. Through the trees, the enemy at the vehicles had gone quiet in the specific way that a force goes quiet when it has sustained repeated losses from an unlocatable shooter and is reassessing. Keller had seen it before. The paralysis of a unit that doesn't know where its threat is. Then, Torres's voice quiet from 2 boulders to his left. "I'm picking up rotors." He listened. Yes. Distant south-southeast. The particular base frequency of a heavy helicopter working hard through mountain air. Raven 4. "Chen, get the infrared strobe out. Orient it straight up. Pulse setting." "Already on it." 5 minutes. Maybe 4. The helicopter was making better time than estimated. The sealed frequency came alive again. Not a voice. The carrier waved the pre-speech compression holding for 3 seconds. 4. Then, "Captain." Something in her voice made him grip the handset harder. Still flat, still controlled, but with a hairline fracture in it that hadn't been there in any of the previous transmissions. "Raven 4 will land hot. There may be accurate fire on the LZ during the approach. The enemy has regrouped and is moving 2 elements through the boulder field's western exposure." A pause. "When the helicopter touches down, your people have 60 seconds to board. Not more. Understood." Another pause. Longer. "Make sure Hrix gets on first." Keller frowned. A specific name. She had been listening to their transmissions long enough to know Hrix by name. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because he's the most critical, and in the chaos of a hot LZ extraction, the most critical often gets left for last." Her voice was absolutely level. "I've seen it happen." The weight of that sentence sat in the cold air between them. "I've seen it happen." Not a theoretical scenario. A memory. Something witnessed. Something that had happened to people she knew. "Echo 7, he said. "After we're out, I'm going to find a way to come back for my..." Don't, she said. Lena. The name came out before he'd decided to say it. He didn't know where it had come from. He didn't know her name. He just said it, and it landed in the transmission with the weight of something guessed at correctly. Whoever you are, come to the LZ. We have room. The helicopter's engine pitch rose in the distance, the pilot signaling 20 seconds regardless. Echo 7. And through the static, through the rotor wash and the gunfire, and the 20-second clock running in his chest, the voice came back. Calm. Unhurried. Everything it had been from the first moment she had answered. I told you, she said. Ghosts don't get evac. Keller stood at the helicopter door, with one foot on the skid, and the rotors throwing a hurricane at his back. Torres's hand closed around his arm. He got on. The door closed. As the aircraft lifted, banking south and climbing hard through the mountain air, he pressed himself against the door and looked through the porthole at the canyon below. At the boulder field. At the southern ridgeline. The figure he thought he could see was gone, or had never been there. But the firing from the western exposure had stopped. And as the helicopter climbed and the mountains fell away below, in the very last moment before the canyon disappeared into the storm, Keller saw it. A single muzzle flash from the southern ridge. One shot, then nothing. He sat back from the window. Torres sat across from him. She was watching his face. She made it, Torres said. Not a question. Keller looked at the window. The mountains were gone now, swallowed by the storm and the altitude and the distance. I don't know, he said. Torres was quiet for a moment. She knew the frequency. She knew the terrain. She knew our patrol schedule well enough to identify a leak in command. She knew Hendrix's name. She looked up. That's not someone who's been living in the mountains for 6 years with no contact. That's someone who's been watching, systematically, for a long time. Yes, Keller said. Watching what? He didn't answer that. He was thinking about what she'd said. I've seen it happen. And the specific weight behind those words, the weight of someone who wasn't describing theory, but memory. He was thinking about the classified incident. The sealed frequency. The disaster that had buried Echo 7 6 years ago and erased everything associated with it from the accessible record. He was thinking about the fact that Major Carver had known about Rally Point Zulu, had directed them toward a landing zone that Echo 7 had called a kill box without hesitation, and had been right. And he was thinking about what that meant. What it had been. For how long. How deep it went. The helicopter banked east, climbing above the storm ceiling. For a moment, the sky above the clouds was startlingly clear, black, and enormous, scattered with stars that had no idea what was happening in the valleys below them. She said the incident that closed the frequency happened 6 years ago, Keller said. Torres nodded. That's not ancient history. That's recent enough to still be active in someone's files. He met her gaze. And whoever sent 40 soldiers to a secondary LZ that only existed on a sealed frequency transmission is still operational. He paused. Echo 7 has been watching them. That's why she knows the terrain. The patrol schedules. Which landing zones are kill boxes. He looked at Torres. She's been building a case. Torres stared at him. For 6 years, she said. She's been building a case for 6 years. The helicopter flew east through the cleared air above the storm. Below them, the mountains were invisible, buried in white. Somewhere in those mountains on a southern ridge, above a box canyon, a figure was either moving through the snow toward safety. Or was not. Keller pulled the sealed frequency handset from his vest. The battery was still live, the channel still open. He pressed transmit. His voice was quiet enough that only Torres could hear it over the rotor noise. Echo 7. I don't know if you can receive this. I don't know if you're still out there. A pause. But I want you to know I'm going to find out what happened 6 years ago. The incident. All of it. He stopped. You've been carrying this alone for a long time. I'd like that to stop. He released the button. Static. The clean white hiss of an open channel. He kept the frequency open. And in the static of the dead frequency in the space between his last words and whatever came next, something changed. Not a voice. Not a carrier wave. Something smaller than that. A fractional shift in the character of the noise so brief and so subtle that it might have been equipment interference or atmospheric distortion, or the product of an exhausted mind searching the static for something it desperately wanted to find. Or it might have been a transmit button pressed and held for exactly 1 second by someone who wanted to say something and decided in the end not to say it. Keller looked at the handset. He said nothing. But he kept the frequency open for the entire flight home. They landed at Forward Operating Base Harlow at 0447. The medical team was already moving before the skids fully settled, 2 trauma nurses and a surgeon, running low under the blades with a gurney, hands reaching for Hicks before anyone else had stepped off the aircraft. Keller stepped onto solid ground and felt his legs register the solidity with something close to surprise. 18 hours of frozen trenches and mountain terrain had apparently renegotiated his body's expectations about what the world was supposed to feel like. Torres landed beside him. She looked at the cluster of personnel waiting beyond the medevac pad. Medical staff, a duty officer, and 2 other figures standing slightly apart from the rest in the particular posture of people who were there for reasons other than medical support. Company, Torres said quietly. Keller had already seen them. The first figure was a Colonel Margaret Ashford, the brigade commander. Colonels did not typically meet helicopter extractions at 0400, unless the situation that produced the extraction had significant command implications. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s, with the kind of physical stillness Keller associated with people who had learned through long practice to conserve energy for moments that actually required it. The second figure was Major Carver. Keller's soldiers were filing off the helicopter around him. Torres, Diaz, Chen, Yamamoto limping badly now that the adrenaline had fully receded. The medical team was moving Hendricks with the controlled urgency of people who understood that seconds had specific values attached to them. None of it occupied more than a fraction of Keller's attention. Most of his attention was on Carver. The major looked exactly as he always did, pressed precise. But he was standing 3 feet to Ashford's left and slightly behind her, and he was watching Keller's face with an expression of careful neutrality that told Keller nothing and everything simultaneously. Ashford moved first. She crossed the medevac pad with efficient strides and stopped in front of Keller with the kind of personal space calibration that flagged a serious conversation. "Captain?" Her voice was level. Not warm, not cold. Transactional. "You're going to tell me exactly what happened out there, starting with why you bypassed the authorized extraction point and ending with why your primary radio battery was manually removed mid-operation." "I will, ma'am." Keller held her gaze. "With respect, I'd prefer to do that in a private setting." Ashford studied him for a moment, then "My office, 20 minutes. She turned and walked back toward the main structure without waiting for acknowledgement. Carver followed her, and as he passed Keller, he did something that Keller registered and filed with the specificity of a man cataloging evidence. He met Keller's eyes for exactly 1 second, and in that second, his expression shifted from neutral to something that was almost a warning. Then it was gone and Carver was walking away. Torres leaned close. "Did he just—" "Yes," Keller said. "What does that mean?" "I'm going to find out." 18 minutes later, Keller sat across a metal desk from Colonel Ashford and told her a version of the night that was true in every verifiable particular and incomplete in the ways that mattered. He told her about the firebase falling, about the trench, about the communications failure and the decision to try an alternative frequency, about the voice on the frequency, the tactical support, the tracer-guided movement through the enemy line. He told her about the warning regarding Rally Point Zulu and his decision to divert to the secondary landing zone. He told her that he'd removed the primary radio battery because he'd assessed it was compromising their position. He did not tell her the name of the frequency. He did not tell her what Echo 7 had said about the leak in command. He did not tell her about the specific accusation regarding the patrol schedule and the 3 people who had access to the operational planning cell. Ashford listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The voice on the frequency," she said. "You have no identification." "No, ma'am." "Male, female?" "Female." Ashford wrote something on the notepad in front of her. "And this person had current intelligence on Rally Point Zulu's security status. She said it was compromised. She was correct. The force that tracked us to the secondary LZ confirms that someone knew our movement." "Someone," Ashford said. The word sat between them. She looked at it for a moment. "Captain, I want to be direct with you. What you're implying, even by omission, is a serious accusation against personnel in this command structure. Accusations of that nature require evidence, not a voice on an unauthorized frequency. Evidence, Keller said. Yes, ma'am. Are you opening an investigation into the firebase ambush? Something crossed Ashford's face. Brief. A compression around the eyes. That determination is above my authority, she said. Above Brigade Command's authority. Captain. Ma'am. He stood. He picked up his cover from the corner of the desk. 18 people came home tonight. 4 of them are in surgery or recovery right now. I want to make sure whoever made it necessary for them to be there is held accountable. He paused. I'll take whatever channel you point me toward, but I'm going to find that channel. Ashford said nothing. He left. The base was quiet in the pre-dawn hour. Keller walked from the command building toward the transient barracks and took a route that passed the communications section, which was not dark. Chen was sitting at a terminal with the focused intensity of someone pursuing a specific piece of information. Keller stood in the doorway. You're supposed to be in medical. I went. Chen didn't look up. They said I was fine. I signed the form. A pause. I've been thinking about the frequency band we accessed tonight. Sealed frequencies don't just get sealed, sir. There's a classification action paperwork, an incident report, a decision chain, and that chain has names on it. Keller stepped inside and let the door close behind him. I'm looking for any reference to that frequency band in the accessible records database, Chen continued. And I'm finding something interesting. He pointed at the screen. The band is classified, but the classification action references a parent document. Document number 7741-Alpha-Kilo, dated 6 years and 2 months ago. Classified above my clearance level, but the existence of the document is accessible. He paused. The document title is After Action Report Operation Greyhound. Keller looked at the screen. Operation Greyhound, he said. Never heard of it. Neither has the unclassified index, which is unusual for a named operation. Named operations get logged even when the content is classified. They exist in the index. Chen looked at Keller. This one doesn't. Someone removed it. But they forgot to scrub the reference in the frequency classification action. He paused. Which means the operation was buried after the fact. Retroactively. A classified disaster. Her entire team. An after-action report removed from the record system, leaving nothing behind but a ghost in the frequency documentation. Can you get access to 7741 Alpha Kilo? Keller asked. Not from here. Chen paused. But I know who can. The name Chen gave him was Captain Elise Varda, the base's intelligence officer. Keller had met her twice at briefings and assessed her as competent, careful, and possessed of the kind of institutional skepticism that made good intelligence officers and difficult dinner companions. He found her in her quarters at 0530 awake. She opened the door, looked at him, looked at the state of his uniform and said, I heard the extraction came in hot. Closer to 15 hours outside. She stepped back from the door. He came in. It took him 10 minutes to tell her what he needed. He told her about the frequency, about Echo 7, about the tactical intelligence that had been accurate in every verifiable detail, including the killbox assessment of Rally Point Zulu. He told her about Operation Greyhound, the buried classification action, the retroactive removal from the index. He watched her face while he talked. In the 9th minute, when he said the name Greyhound, something happened in her eyes that wasn't neutral. You know it, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I know of it, she said carefully. There are certain things in this business that you hear about sideways, not officially. The way a story gets told at the wrong hour by someone who's had too much to drink. Or the way a name gets mentioned once and then never mentioned again. She sat down. She looked at her hands. 6 years ago, a recon team, 8 personnel, deployed on a long-range surveillance mission in the northern sector, highly classified. The team was tracking a high-value target, had been in the field for 11 days. She paused. Command ordered a fire mission, an artillery strike on a target the surveillance team had identified. A friendly fire incident, Keller said. No. Her voice was precise. That's the thing. It wasn't a navigation error or a coordinates mistake. The strike was ordered knowing the recon team was in the target area. It was ordered because the team had gathered intelligence that someone in command didn't want gathered, and eliminating the team under the cover of a fire mission was cleaner than the alternative. The room was very quiet. 7 of the 8 were killed in the strike or in the engagement that followed, she said. The 8th was listed as killed in action in the after-action report. The report was then buried. The frequency they'd been using was classified and sealed. A pause. The 8th was never found. No remains. No confirmed death. Just listed. Because she wasn't dead, Keller said. Varda looked at him with an expression that was processing several things simultaneously. The she. The implication of the present tense. Everything those 2 words meant when placed next to everything he'd just told her. The voice on the frequency, she said slowly. She knew the terrain. She knew the patrol schedules. She knew which landing zones were set up as kill boxes. She's been watching for 6 years, he said. Building a case. He paused. Against whoever gave the order to fire on the recon team in Greyhound. Whoever is still operational. Whoever is still running the same game using command authority to eliminate inconvenient personnel, and then burying the evidence. He paused again longer. Whoever knew our patrol schedule precisely enough to time an ambush to the minute. Varda was very still. Keller, she said, and her voice had dropped to the register of someone choosing their words with extreme care. If what you're describing is accurate, if there's an active operation to suppress Greyhound and eliminate witnesses, then the person responsible has enough institutional authority to have buried a named operation 6 years ago without anyone catching it. She met his eyes, which means they have enough authority to know this conversation is happening. I know. And you're still having it? Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. I need to think, she said. I know. I'm not asking you to do anything tonight. I'm asking you to know what I know. He moved toward the door. In case something happens to either of us. Document 7741-Alpha-Kilo, she said quietly. After action report Operation Greyhound. That's where it starts. He left. The sun came up gray and cold over FOB Harlow. Keller had not slept. He understood intellectually that he needed to, but his mind was running on something quieter and more persistent than adrenaline. He was in the MWR room with a cup of coffee that tasted like it had made promises it couldn't keep when Torres found him at 700. She sat down across from him, clearly rested, clearly ready to have a conversation he was not entirely prepared for. How's Hrix? He asked. Out of surgery. They think he'll keep the arm. She accepted the coffee he pushed toward her. The other 3 critical are stable. Yamamoto is being appropriately furious about his leg, which the medical staff are interpreting as a good sign. Keller almost smiled. Torres looked at him with the specific expression she used when she was about to say something she'd been organizing for a while. You went to Varda. How do you know that? Because I know you. And because Chen told me what he found, and I knew you'd go to Varda with it. She wrapped both hands around the coffee. Is she going to help? She's thinking about it. She needs to think faster. Torres set the coffee down. Carver has been in Ashford's office for the last 2 hours. That's a long meeting for before dawn on a bad operational night. She paused. And there are 2 people from the Inspector General's office who arrived on the 0600 resupply flight. Neither of them told anyone what they're here for. She looked at him steadily. They asked to speak with you first thing. Keller set down his coffee. The IG could mean several things. An investigation into the firebase loss. An investigation into his decision to bypass Rally Point Zulu. Or it could mean someone in the chain wanted him contained and quiet while they managed the narrative of the night, and the IG was the fastest available tool for that. The question was which of those things it was, or whether it was all of them at once. The 2 IG representatives were in a conference room in the command building. The man introduced himself as Investigator Hollis. The woman was Investigator Park. Both carried the particular affect of people who had been doing institutional enforcement work long enough that it had become their natural state. Hollis opened a folder. Captain Keller, we're here to conduct a preliminary inquiry into the events of last night. Specifically the loss of Firebase Kestrel and the subsequent extraction operation. This is a preliminary inquiry, not a formal investigation. You're not under any obligation to answer our questions, but your cooperation will be noted. I understand, Keller said. He described the events, the same account he'd given Ashford with the same careful omissions. Hollis took notes. Park watched Keller's face with the attentive neutrality of someone trained to read it. At what point did you decide to bypass Rally Point Zulu? Hollis said. When I assessed it was compromised. Based on the precision of the ambush, the pattern of enemy movement, and information from a source in the field. What source? A voice on an alternative frequency. An individual providing tactical support to my unit. Do you have an identification for this individual? No. A name? Keller met his eyes. No. Park spoke for the first time. Her voice was quieter than Hollis's, more precise. Captain Keller. Are you familiar with an operational frequency designation known as Echo 7? The room temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees. Where did you hear that designation? Keller said. Park's expression didn't change. Please answer the question. Am I being formally investigated? Investigator Park? He kept his voice level. Because you've asked me a question about a specific operational frequency designation that, as far as I understand, is classified above my clearance level. Which means either you have clearance to discuss it, in which case I'd like to understand the context of your question, or you're attempting to confirm knowledge of something classified by watching my reaction. He paused. Which is a different kind of question. Park and Hollis exchanged a look. It lasted less than a second. Not the look of investigators who had caught a subject out. The look of investigators who had just had their approach identified with more precision than they expected. Captain, Hollis said carefully. We're trying to understand what resources you had available during the extraction operation. I had 18 exhausted soldiers, 40 rounds per man, and 4 urgent casualties. Those were my resources. And the voice on the frequency. A piece of luck. Static opened up for a few minutes and someone came through. I can't explain it technically. Might have been atmospheric interference creating an open channel. I honestly couldn't tell you. He looked at Hollis steadily. What I can tell you is that the guidance I received from that transmission saved 18 lives. And I'd make the same decision again. Hollis wrote. Park watched. One more question, Park said. In your assessment, was the firebase ambush the result of an intelligence failure or something else? The question was designed to make him say a specific thing, or pointedly not say it. Something else, Keller said. Park wrote that down. Thank you, Captain. We may need to speak with you again. I'm available. He stood. Are you also speaking with Major Carver? Neither of them reacted visibly. Park said, We're speaking with multiple personnel. Good, Keller said. He walked directly to Varda's office. She was at her desk with a classified document folder open in front of her, which she closed when he entered. They know about Echo 7, he said. The IG investigators. One of them asked me directly if I was familiar with the designation. Someone briefed them on it before they arrived. Varda was quiet for a moment. She looked at the closed folder, then at Keller. I pulled Greyhound, she said. He went still. Not the classified report. I don't have that access, but I pulled the personnel records for the recon team, cross-referencing the operation timeframe with the casualty records. She opened the folder. 7 confirmed KIA, all documented. The 8th team member listed as KIA, but without a recovery operation. Without confirmed remains. She slid a page across the desk. Keller looked at it. The name at the top of the page was Cortez Lena M., Recon Sharpshooter Staff Sergeant. Status KIA, unconfirmed. Below the name, a service photograph. A woman in her early 30s. Dark hair cut short. Serious eyes that didn't give much away. The kind of face that could belong to a voice that was calm in a blizzard. Keller looked at the photograph for a long time. She was the best shooter in her battalion at the time of Greyhound, Varda said. Qualification scores that made her instructors reconsider what the upper limit of the scale should be. 11 months of field experience in this exact operational theater before the incident. She knew these mountains, Keller. She grew up in terrain like this. Her evaluation reports use the word instinctive about her navigation. That word does not get written in military evaluation reports. He looked up from the photograph. Who gave the order for the Greyhound fire mission? That's in the classified AAR. But the fire mission would have required authorization from the operational planning cell, specifically from the officer commanding artillery coordination. She paused. 6 years ago in this theater that officer was... The door opened. Not a knock. Not a pause. The door simply opened with the authority of someone who does not expect to be kept waiting. Major Carver stood in the doorway. He looked at Keller. He looked at Varda. He looked at the open folder on the desk and the photograph visible at the top of it, and his entire assessment of the situation changed in less than a second. "Captain Keller," he said. His voice was level. "Colonel Ashford would like to see you immediately." "We're in the middle of something," Varda said. "The colonel's request wasn't optional, Captain Varda." His eyes were still on Keller. "Now please." Keller stood slowly. He looked at Varda. He looked at the photograph of Lena Cortez. He looked at Carver. "Tell the colonel I'll be there in 2 minutes," he said. "Now," Carver said. 2 minutes. Keller kept his voice entirely even. "I'll be there in 2 minutes." The two men looked at each other across the office. The space between them was approximately 6 feet and contained a very large number of things that were not being said. Carver turned and left. The door stayed open behind him. Keller turned back to Varda. She was already moving. Folding the personnel record closed. Pulling a second document from under the folder. Writing something on a notepad in compressed shorthand writing without looking up. 6 years ago, she said quietly, still writing. The officer commanding artillery coordination in this theater was a lieutenant colonel. She tore the page from the notepad, folded it once, and slid it across the desk. He's been promoted since then. Keller picked up the folded page. He put it in his vest pocket without opening it. "Destroy the folder," he said. "Already planning to." He walked out of the office and down the corridor toward the command building. He could feel the folded page in his pocket, with the specific weight of information that changes the shape of everything that comes after it. He stopped at the door of the command building back to the wall where the security camera in the corner could not see his hands, and he unfolded the page. 1 line, a name and a rank. He read it. He stood very still for a moment. Then he folded the page again and walked through the door. Because the name on that page was not Lieutenant Colonel. It was Brigadier General, and the person it named was already in the room waiting for him. Brigadier General Warren Holt stood at the window of Ashford's office, with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the base in the gray morning light. He did not turn when Keller entered. That was the first thing. The deliberate performance of not turning. The studied indifference of a man who outranked everyone in the room by enough margin that he could afford to make them wait for his attention. Ashford was at her desk. Carver stood to the left of the door, which put him behind Keller when the door closed. The 2 IG investigators, Hollis and Park, occupied the chairs against the right wall with their folders closed on their laps, present as witnesses or as something else. Holt turned. He was a large man, not physically imposing in the way of someone who maintained fitness, but large in the way of someone whose institutional authority had accreted to his physical presence over decades until they were inseparable. Mid-60s. Silver hair cut with military precision, the star on his collar catching the light from the window. He looked at Keller the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved. "Captain Keller," he said. His voice was measured, almost genial. "Sit down." Keller sat. "I've been reading the preliminary report on last night's operation." Holt didn't move from the window, didn't pick up a folder or look at notes. He was doing this from memory, which meant he'd prepared. Which meant this meeting had been planned before Keller had done anything this morning. Firebase Kestrel, 43 personnel. Significant casualties. An extraction that bypassed the authorized landing zone based on... He paused with the performance of a man consulting his memory. The tactical judgment of a voice on an unauthorized frequency. "That's an accurate summary," Keller said. Holt finally moved. He came away from the window and sat in the chair directly across from Keller. The informal posture of a man making a deliberate choice to appear unthreatening. "I want you to understand something, Captain. What happened last night was a tragedy. The loss of Firebase Kestrel, the casualties, those are real losses and they deserve a thorough accounting." "I agree," Keller said. "I also want you to understand that the accounting process has to follow proper channels, proper protocol. When individual officers start conducting their own informal inquiries, accessing personnel records outside their clearance level, making allegations against senior personnel based on unverified field intelligence. He stopped. He let the incomplete sentence do its work. It creates problems, institutional problems. I understand. Holt studied him. Something in Keller's steadiness, the absence of the appropriate deference, had registered. Do you? Holt said. Yes, sir. A pause. I also understand that Rally Point Zulu was a designated kill box, that an enemy force was waiting at those coordinates before we ever transmitted them on the authorized net, and that someone with access to the operational planning cell provided our patrol schedule and position to hostile forces. He kept his voice level, respectful, precise. I understand those things very well. The room shifted, not physically, but the temperature of it changed in the way rooms change when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Ashford's hands on her desk were very still. Carver behind Keller made no sound. Hollis and Park did not look at each other. Holt looked at Keller. The geniality was still there. It was remarkable how well maintained it was, but something underneath it had shifted. A barely perceptible hardening, the way ice hardens when the temperature drops another degree below what it was already. That's a significant accusation, Holt said. It's an observation, sir, based on tactical evidence. Keller paused. The mortar targeting on Firebase Kestrel achieved first-round accuracy in blizzard conditions at night. The ambush initiated within the first 3 minutes of peak storm interference, the precise window when our air support was grounded and our communications were most degraded. The enemy force was positioned to block every authorized extraction route simultaneously. He paused. That level of operational precision doesn't come from field reconnaissance. It comes from inside knowledge. And you believe you know the source of that inside knowledge. I believe the investigation will identify it. Holt leaned back slightly. Captain, I've been in this business for 31 years. I've seen officers in your position before. Men who've had a very bad night, who've lost people, who are running on no sleep and significant stress, who start looking for explanations that match the magnitude of what they've experienced. His voice was almost sympathetic. Conspiracy theories are a natural response to traumatic operational failures. The mind looks for agency because randomness is. It's not a conspiracy theory, Keller said. Holt stopped. The patrol schedule that was compromised exists in 3 locations in this command structure. The operational planning cell records the battalion S2 files and the brigade command system. He met Holt's eyes. Those are finite verifiable locations. An investigation would be able to determine which access log shows unauthorized retrieval of those records in the 48 hours before the Firebase assault. Silence. If the investigation is conducted properly, Keller added. Holt looked at him for a long moment. He was very good at the long moment. The silence of a man who had spent decades letting silence work for him. Major Carver, he said finally without looking away from Keller. Would you give us the room? A pause. Then the sound of the door opening. Carver's footsteps, the door closing. Hollis and Park remained. Holt looked at them briefly. You two. Something passed between the investigators. They stood and left, and the door closed again, and the room contracted to 3 people. Keller, Ashford at her desk, and Holt in the chair across from him. Holt put his forearms on his knees and leaned forward. The geniality dropped. Not entirely, but it stepped back to reveal something more direct behind it. I'm going to speak plainly to you, Holt said. Please, Keller said. You've been asking questions about an operation that was classified and closed 6 years ago. You've been accessing personnel records associated with that operation. You've been sharing what you found with your intelligence officer. He paused. That's a significant amount of activity for a man who's been on base for less than 3 hours. I work fast, Keller said. Something crossed Holt's face. Fast and controlled, but Keller caught it. Operation Greyhound, Keller said. He watched the name land. It landed harder than anything else had. The geniality didn't just step back. For 2 full seconds it disappeared entirely. And in the space it left was something Keller recognized from a long career of reading people in high-stakes environments. Not guilt exactly. Guilt was too simple for what he saw. This was the expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, and has become expert at carrying it, but is nonetheless tired of the weight. "You don't want to go there," Holt said quietly. "I think the 8 personnel of the Greyhound recon team would disagree." "7 of them are dead." "7," Keller said, "not 8. The silence that followed was very complete. Ashford, who had been still at her desk throughout the entire exchange, made a small sound that wasn't a word. Keller didn't look at her. Holt sat back. The mask came back up slower and more deliberate than before. The way a man puts on armor when he realizes the situation requires it. "Whatever you think you know," Holt said, and his voice had gone cold in a way that was entirely different from the measured cold of before. This was genuine temperature. The cold of something that had stopped performing and started meaning. "You don't have the documentation to support it. You have field impressions and access logs and the word of a voice on a frequency that doesn't officially exist." He paused. "That's not a case. That's a story." "Right now," Keller said. Holt stood. He moved back to the window. He stood with his back to the room for a moment. "You're a good officer, Keller." He said it to the window. "Your record is excellent. Your people came home last night because of decisions you made, and I respect that." A pause. "I would hate to see a career like yours derailed by an investigation that goes nowhere and costs you everything." "Is that a warning?" "It's an observation about consequences." Holt turned. His face was completely composed again. "I'm going to recommend a standard after-action review for Firebase Kestrel. Full inquiry into the operational failure complete with access log review." A pause. "That review will be conducted by my office." Keller looked at him. "I'll want full cooperation from all personnel involved," Holt continued, "including you, and including," a pause, "if she exists, whatever independent asset provided you support in the field." Keller stood. "Full cooperation," he said. "Yes, sir." He turned toward the door. "Captain?" Ashford's voice from the desk. The first thing she'd said since he'd entered. He turned. She was looking at him with an expression he still couldn't read entirely, but some of it had resolved into something clearer. Not support exactly. Not opposition. The expression of a person standing at an intersection. Deciding. "Get some rest," she said. "The review won't start until this afternoon." He held her gaze for a moment. "Yes, ma'am." He left. Torres found him outside, sitting on the steps of the transient barracks, with the sealed frequency handset in his hands, turning it over slowly. She sat beside him without asking if he wanted company. "How bad?" she said. "Holt is running the after-action review." A pause. "Holt?" she said. "Yes." She looked at the handset. "Are you going to tell me what's in that folded paper you keep touching in your vest pocket?" He took it out and handed it to her. She unfolded it, read the single line, folded it back. Her face did something careful and controlled and didn't show most of what it was doing. "He's running his own review," she said. "Yes." "That can't be. It's institutional. He has the rank and the authority, and no one has yet given anyone sufficient reason to remove either." He paused. "The access logs," he mentioned, "the ones that would show who pulled the patrol schedule, are going to be reviewed by his office, which means the results of that review are going to say whatever he needs them to say, unless someone else gets to them first." Torres was quiet. "Varda," she said. "She's the best option, but she's exposed now. Carver saw the folder on her desk." "I know." Keller looked at the handset. "I need to talk to Echo 7. Torres looked at it too. "She told you to forget the frequency." "I know." "She was specific about it." "I know that too." He turned the handset over. "But she's been building a case for 6 years, and the man she built it against is currently in a position to bury everything she's gathered. And I don't think she knows that." He paused. "I don't know if she's even still alive to know anything." Torres said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "Try," she said. He went to the communications section. Chen was still there. Keller sat at the secondary terminal, away from the main monitoring systems, and reprogrammed the frequency band on the spare PRC unit sitting on the equipment shelf. The same manual override, the same sequence that opened the channel that wasn't supposed to exist. He keyed transmit. Echo 7, this is Kestrel Actual. He paused. I know what you asked me. I know I agreed to it, but things have changed. I need you to hear what I know, and I need to know you're alive to hear it. Static. The clean white hiss of an empty channel. He waited. Chen sat very still at his terminal, giving him the courtesy of pretending not to be in the room. Lena, Keller said. The name felt different spoken aloud than it had felt in his head. More specific, more real. I know who you are. I know about Greyhound. I know about the 7. And I know you're the 8th. He kept his voice quiet and steady. I know who gave the fire mission order. And I know he's running the review. A pause. Brigadier General Warren Holt. He's here on this base and he's positioned to control the investigation into last night, and by extension, everything that connects to 6 years ago. Static. He waited for 60 full seconds. Nothing. She might not have the radio anymore. The battery might be dead. Or she might be in a position where she simply could not answer. He turned off the handset and looked at his hands. Get me everything you can access on Holt's service record, he said to Chen. Specifically his assignment in this theater 6 years ago. Specifically his role in artillery coordination. That's classified, Chen said. Get me what's accessible. And tell me what the classification wall looks like around what isn't. Chen's hands moved to his keyboard. Yes, sir. The next 3 hours were quiet in the way that precedes things rather than follows them. Keller moved through the base with the deliberate normality of a man doing nothing unusual. Eating, visiting the medical section to check on Hrix and the others, filing the initial portions of his after-action report with language scrubbed of everything that mattered. He was being watched. He knew it. There was a particular quality to how people in certain rooms stopped their conversations when he entered a certain arrangement of eyes that registered his presence and continued registering it after he'd passed. He noted it. He said nothing about it. At 1100, Varda appeared beside him in the corridor outside the medical section and fell into step without preamble. The access logs for the patrol schedule, she said, her voice low and brisk. The Battalion S2 system shows a retrieval of the Kestrel patrol schedule at 21:43 2 nights ago. Retrieved under a service credential that belongs to a communication specialist named Ehrlich, who was on leave at the time of the retrieval. She paused. His credential was used without him, which means someone with admin access to the battalion personnel system pulled the schedule using a borrowed identity, Keller said. The admin access log for the battalion system shows one person with admin rights who accessed the system between 2100 and 2200 2 nights ago. She paused. Major Carver. He has system admin rights through his role as operations officer. He accessed the admin panel at 2138. The Ehrlich credential retrieval happened at 2143. 5 minutes later, Keller said, they turned a corner into the covered walkway between buildings. That's the chain, he said. The beginning of it. Carver isn't the end. He's the mechanism, not the authority. He didn't have operational reason to pull the patrol schedule. He was acting on someone's direction. Holt almost certainly, she said. But proving Holt's direction is a different layer. She stopped walking and turned to face him. Her face was doing the complicated weighing of costs expression, but it had resolved. I'm going to send what I have the access logs, the credential retrieval, the chain to the Judge Advocate General's office directly. Not through brigade, not through Holt's command, directly to JAG level. A pause. That bypasses every channel between here and there. It goes over Holt's head to a legal authority he doesn't control. Keller looked at her. That's a significant decision. You told me 18 people came home because someone had been building a case for 6 years. She paused. I've been building nothing for 8 years. I'm tired of it. He held her gaze for a moment. How long does it take to reach JAG? Secure transmission maybe 40 minutes. Response acknowledging receipt within the hour. Once JAG has the documents, any attempt by Holt to suppress the investigation creates its own paper trail. Another pause. It's not bulletproof, but it changes the geometry. Do it, Keller said. She nodded. No hesitation once the decision was made. She turned and walked back the way they'd come. Keller watched her go and thought about the geometry of the next several hours. Holt running his review this afternoon. Varda's transmission going out this morning. The window between those two events. The question of what Holt would do when he realized the access logs had been found before he could sanitize them. He pulled out the sealed frequency handset and keyed transmit one more time, standing alone in the covered walkway. Echo 7. Varda is sending the documentation to Theater Jag within the hour. Holt's exposure is on record outside his control. He paused. Whatever you've been collecting for 6 years, if there's any way to get it to the same channel now, is the time. Another pause. I'm going to be in his review this afternoon. I can hold the line for however long it takes, but I need to know someone's out there. Static. He lowered the handset. Then the carrier wave came. Faint. Very faint. As if the transmitting radio were low on power, or very far away, or both. The pre-speech compression he knew now, as well as he knew Torres's voice, or the sound of rotors at distance. He pressed the handset to his ear. I hear you, Captain. 3 words. Quiet. Further away than before. But present. Real. Carrying the same flat calm that had been there from the beginning. He closed his eyes for half a second. Are you all right? He said. A pause. Define all right. It was the closest thing to humor she had produced in every hour of contact since the night before. And it arrived with a quality that was almost disorienting. The realization that behind the flatness, behind the tactical precision, and the 6 years of mountain silence, there was still a person who could make that kind of response. Alive, he said, still working on it. A pause, a longer one. Holt was the one who ordered the strike. He knew we were in the target area. I have documentation. A copy of the original fire mission request with his authentication code and a transmission record showing he acknowledged our presence in the grid 30 minutes before the strike. Another pause. I've been carrying it for 6 years. Physical copies, not digital. Where? Safe. I need to know the JAG transmission will actually reach someone who can act on it before Holt realizes what's happening. Varda is good, Keller said. I trust her. You trusted me on a dead frequency in a blizzard and 18 people came home. The static held the silence. Wind through the walkway. The distant sound of the base continuing its mourning indifferent to the particular shape of what was unfolding in the covered corridor. There's a dead drop location, she said. Northeast Ridge. The box canyon we used for the LZ. On the south wall, 3rd boulder from the west end, there's a notch at knee height. Waterproof case. Keller took out his notepad and wrote it down. That case has everything, she said. Fire mission authentication, transmission records, a log I've kept since Greyhound of every contact, every operation, every piece of command activity that connects back to the original decision. A pause. 6 years of it. I'll get someone to the location, he said. Don't go yourself. They're watching you. I know Keller. She waited. The 7 people who died in Greyhound, their families were told they were killed by enemy action. That it was clean, that it was fast, that it was in the line of duty. A pause long enough that the static had space to breathe. It wasn't any of those things. I know, he said, quieter. They deserve the record to reflect what actually happened. They will, he said. I promise you. The carrier wave held for a moment longer. Then, don't make promises on dead frequencies, Captain. Make them in rooms where people can hold you to them. The channel clicked off. Keller stood in the covered walkway for a moment. Then he put the handset in his vest and started walking toward the communications section. It would have to be Chen. Someone fit, someone trusted someone. Holt's people weren't watching. He was halfway there when Carver fell into step beside him, not from behind, from a side corridor precisely timed. The geometry of an interception that had been planned. Carver walked at his pace, looking straight ahead. The review starts at 1400, he said. Holt's going to ask you directly about the frequency, about who was on it. He's going to want a name. I imagine he will, Keller said. Keller. Carver stopped walking. His voice had dropped to the same register as the almost warning on the medevac pad. I've been in his orbit for 4 years. I've done things I'm not. He stopped, started again. Last night I pulled your patrol schedule because he told me to. I was told it was a counterintelligence operation. that you were the subject of a security investigation. A pause. I believed him. Keller stopped walking. He turned to look at Carver. The Major's face was doing something that a man with his training and career investment almost never allowed his face to do in a professional setting. It was showing exactly what was happening inside it. You didn't know what it was for, Keller said carefully. I didn't know what it was for. His jaw was tight. When the firebase went down, and I heard your medevac request on the net, I understood what I'd done. A pause. Is this why you had me sent away from Varda's office this morning, to get me away from her documents? The muscles in Carver's jaw worked. Yes. A pause. But I didn't destroy them. I could have. I saw what was on the desk, and I could have taken the folder, and it would have been gone before you got back. Why didn't you? He looked at Keller with the expression of a man who has run out of answers he's comfortable giving. 22 soldiers came home in body bags from Firebase Kestrel before yours made it out, he said. 22. Keller looked at him. Then, the review. 1,400. Yes. I'm going to tell Holt exactly what happened. Every tactical decision. Every piece of intelligence that informed it. Every action taken. I'm going to be completely honest about everything. Carver looked at him. The specific emphasis of a man who knows that honesty can be deployed as a weapon had registered. And the access logs, Keller said. Carver closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Theater JAG has them, Keller said. As of this morning. Carver opened his eyes. He looked at Keller for a long moment. His face was running the calculation of what it meant and what his options were from this point forward. I should probably request to speak with JAG directly, Carver said slowly. Yes, Keller said. You should. Before 1400 would be my recommendation. Carver nodded once. The tight formal nod of a man executing a decision. He turned and walked in the direction of the legal section. Keller watched him go. Then he turned back toward the communications section, and as he walked, he was doing the arithmetic of the afternoon. The review at 1400, Varda's transmission already in transit, Carver walking toward JAG, and in a box canyon in the mountains northeast of FOB Harlow, a waterproof case behind the third boulder from the west end that had been sitting there for 6 years waiting for exactly this moment. Chen left for the mountains at 11:40. Chen had been given the location in field shorthand spoken once quietly with no written record. He had listened without asking unnecessary questions, which was the quality Keller had been counting on. He requisitioned a vehicle under the cover of a routine resupply run to the forward observation post, legitimate enough on paper, the kind of errand that didn't draw attention on a busy post-operation morning, and he drove out through the main gate at a pace that communicated nothing in particular. Keller watched the vehicle leave from the window of the communications section. Then he turned back to the work of the next 2 hours. The review was at 1400. It was now 11:53. He had 2 hours and 7 minutes to prepare for a formal proceeding conducted by the man who had ordered the deaths of 7 soldiers 6 years ago and spent the intervening period ensuring the record reflected something different. He sat at the terminal and wrote, not a report. He had already filed the sanitized version of his after-action through the standard channels. What he wrote now was a complete account. Every tactical decision from the moment the firebase fell to the moment Raven 4 lifted from the box canyon. Full context for each decision, including the context he had withheld from every previous account. The sealed frequency. Echo 7's tactical guidance. The warning about Rally Point Zulu. The precision of the ambush. The access log evidence Varda had found. Carver's confirmation. All of it written in the plain declarative language of a formal military statement, the kind designed to be read into a record and survive subsequent attempts at reinterpretation. When he finished, he printed 2 copies. One went into his vest pocket. The other he sealed in an envelope addressed to the Theater JAG office with a note requesting it be associated with Varda's earlier transmission. He gave the envelope to the duty clerk with instructions to send it through the secure mail system. The clerk took it and logged it without comment. That was the redundancy. Varda's transmission. Carver's statement. And now this. 3 separate channels. 3 separate records. All describing the same chain of events from 3 independent perspectives. Holt could manage 1. He could possibly manage 2. 3 simultaneous channels all pointing at the same documentation, all already in the possession of an authority outside his command. That was a different kind of problem. That was the kind that didn't get managed. That got investigated. Torres found him at 12:30 in the chow hall, eating with the mechanical efficiency of a man fueling a machine he intended to run hard in the next several hours. She sat across from him with coffee and nothing else. "Varda told me," she said. She sent the transmission at 11:15. Jag acknowledged receipt at 11:52. Good. She's been summoned to Holt's pre-review briefing at 13:30. Torres looked at her coffee. That's deliberate. He's pulling her out of play before the review starts. He knows something moved, Keller said. He may not know how much. It doesn't matter now, though, right? No, he said. The documentation is outside his reach. Whatever he does in the next 2 hours, he's doing it with materials already in Jag's possession. He set down his fork. He can try to bury the review. That's all he can do now. Try. Torres was quiet for a moment. Yamamoto is asking to attend the review as a witness. He filed a formal request this morning. She paused. From the medical bed. The form was witnessed by Hicks, who apparently dictated the supporting statement from his post-surgery recovery. Keller looked up. Diaz also filed. The other 11 who were ambulatory filed as a group submission. Torres met his eyes. Every one of them put their name on a document requesting to testify about what happened at Firebase Kestrel. Keller thought about the trench, the tracer line through the storm. 18 people sprinting through a gap in an enemy line toward a burning phosphorus marker that pointed toward a tree line they couldn't see. Following a voice they didn't know toward a direction that should have been impossible. Sometimes trust is not a rational calculation. Sometimes it is the thing you choose when rational calculation has run out of road. Let's go, he said. The review convened at 1400 in the main conference room of the command building. Holt sat at the head of the table. Ashford to his right. Hollis and Park from the IG to his left. 2 other officers Keller didn't recognize sat further down, legal representatives based on their insignia. Torres had requested and been granted observer status, which Holt had permitted with the equanimity of a man who could afford to permit small gestures. Varda was not in the room. Keller noted the absence and filed it. Holt opened the review with the practiced smoothness of someone who had run many of these proceedings. He framed the scope efficiently. The firebase loss, the extraction, the questions of tactical decision-making and command authority. Then he turned to Keller. Captain Keller, let's begin with the firebase defense. Walk us through the initial contact. Keller walked him through it. Thorough, precise, entirely unembellished. Every contact report. Every tactical decision. Every moment of the defense from initial enemy engagement through the collapse of the perimeter. He used the language of an officer providing a formal military account, the language of specificity and sequence, and he gave Holt nothing to question, because there was nothing to question. The defense of Firebase Kestrel had been conducted correctly under impossible conditions. Holt listened, took notes, asked clarifying questions about timing and positioning that were legitimate questions, the kind that belonged in a genuine inquiry. Keller answered all of them. Then the extraction, Holt said. You decided not to use Rally Point Zulu. Correct. Based on what assessment? Based on intelligence from a field source indicating the LZ was compromised, corroborated by the tactical pattern of the enemy's operational setup. The ambush was too precisely timed to the window of our maximum vulnerability. The enemy knew our patrol schedule. Rally Point Zulu was the authorized extraction point under that schedule. Using it would have put my unit directly into a prepared kill zone. Holt made a note. And this field source. The voice on the unauthorized frequency. Yes, sir. You have no identification for this individual. I have an assessment, sir. I believe the individual was a former military asset with specific familiarity with the operational theater. Belief, Holt said with the precision of a man identifying an imprecision. Not confirmed identification. Not confirmed, no. And you made the decision to bypass the authorized extraction point, a decision with significant command authority implications based on an unconfirmed field contact. I made the decision based on all available tactical intelligence, of which the field contact was one element. But the determining element. Keller paused, held Holt's gaze. When the alternative is leading my people into a kill box, sir, yes, it was the determining element. The room was quiet for a moment. Holt moved on. Questions about the movement through the mountains, the secondary landing zone coordinates, the radio battery removal. Keller answered everything. His account was complete and consistent, and he did not offer information beyond what was asked. Then Holt set down his pen. Captain Keller. His voice had changed slightly. The geniality had been put away. What was left was professional and direct and carried the weight of the star on his collar. I want to ask you about something outside the immediate operational account. It's come to my attention that this morning prior to this review, you engaged in a series of informal inquiries regarding personnel records and classified operational documentation. A pause. Specifically regarding an operation designated Greyhound. The room was very still. Yes, sir, Keller said. You accessed records above your clearance level. I accessed the records available to me. I asked another officer with appropriate clearance to access material above mine. Captain Varda. Yes, sir. Holt leaned forward slightly. Captain, I want to be transparent with you. The concerns you've raised about the integrity of the patrol schedule, about potential compromises in the command structure, those concerns are noted. They will be investigated through appropriate channels. He paused. But the investigation of Operation Greyhound is a classified matter and is not within the scope of this review. I understand, sir. Keller paused. I'd like to note for the record that I've filed a complete written account of last night's operation, including all intelligence that informed my tactical decisions, with the Theater Judge Advocate General's office. The silence that followed was a different quality from the ones before it. Not the silence of a proceeding, pausing to absorb information, but the silence of a room in which several people were recalibrating simultaneously. Holt's composure held. It was a remarkable thing to watch. But Keller had been watching his face for 90 minutes, and he saw it. The fractional compression around the eyes. The micro-adjustment of the muscles around his mouth. That filing, Holt said carefully, was not authorized through proper command channels. No, sir. Given that the command channels may themselves be subjects of the account, I assessed that direct filing was appropriate. A pause. The JAG office acknowledged receipt at 11:52 this morning. The two unfamiliar legal officers at the far end of the table exchanged a look. Hollis stopped writing and looked at Park. Ashford, who had been still at Holt's right through the entire proceeding, moved for the first time. A small shift in posture, a reorientation of her body toward the center of the table. General Holt, she said, and her voice was perfectly even. Given the captain's statement regarding the JAG filing, I believe the scope of this review may need to be reconsidered. Holt looked at her. That look lasted 2 seconds. It contained in Keller's assessment the entire history of whatever relationship existed between those two people, the long habit of deference, and whatever was in this moment departing from that habit. Colonel Ashford. The review should be suspended pending coordination with Theater JAG, she said. Standard protocol when a JAG filing exists concurrent with a command review of the same events. One of the unfamiliar legal officers said quietly to the other, She's correct. It's regulatory. Holt sat back. He looked at the table for a moment, then at Keller. The mask was completely intact, but it was doing something different now. It was the mask of a man who has assessed his position and found it changed, who is running the calculation of next steps from a fundamentally altered starting point. Suspend the review, he said. His voice was entirely level. Pending JAG coordination, he stood, gathered his folder, walked to the door with the unhurried bearing of a man in complete control. And Keller watched him and understood that what he was watching was not retreat. It was repositioning. Holt was a man who had survived 31 years by knowing when to move and in which direction. But the documentation was already at JAG. Carver's statement was already at JAG. The access logs were already at JAG. And in a box canyon in the mountains northeast of FOB Harlow, Chen was either already at the south wall or 40 minutes away from it. And the waterproof case behind the third boulder from the west end had been there for 6 years waiting for exactly this moment. The door closed behind Holt. No one in the room moved for a moment. Then Ashford looked at Keller. The thing in her expression that had been unresolved since the first moment he'd walked into her office that morning had resolved completely. Not warmth exactly. She was not a woman who did warmth in professional settings. But it was something real, something that had made its decision and was done weighing. "Get something to eat, Captain," she said. "It's going to be a long afternoon." Chen called at 16:20. Keller was in Varda's office. She had not been at the review because Holt had sent her to a briefing specifically scheduled to occupy her during that window, a move that had failed to matter once the review was suspended. She was at her desk, jaw tight, when Keller arrived, and she had been running her own quiet calculations through the afternoon. Chen's voice on the line was the voice of a man who has done something difficult and is reporting with precision because precision is the tool available to him. "I found it," he said. "Location confirmed. Third boulder knee-height notch on the eastern face. Waterproof Pelican case. Combination lock 4 digits." A pause. "She sent the combination on the frequency this morning. I'm looking at the contents. Describe them." A pause while Chen assessed what he was looking at. "A fire mission authentication document, with a general's authentication code and a timestamp." His voice was controlled. "A radio transmission log showing a message acknowledging recon team presence in the strike grid. The message timestamp is 31 minutes before the strike." Another pause. "A handwritten journal. It looks..." He stopped. "It looks like it covers several years, multiple entries, dates, locations, observations, names." Another pause. "Keller, this is very thorough. Photograph every page, every document. Upload to the secure server immediately." Keller kept his voice steady. "Then bring the originals back. Come directly to the base. Do not stop anywhere." "Yes, sir." "Chen." A pause. "Good work." "She did the work," Chen said quietly. "I just drove to pick it up." The line closed. Keller set the phone down. He looked at Varda, who had heard enough of the call to understand what it meant. 6 years, she said. She looked at the wall for a moment. Every page of that journal is going to be a timeline of what she watched him do, what she watched this command structure do. A pause. While everyone assumed she was dead. Yes. The families of the Greyhound personnel. Her voice was very controlled. They've been living with the official account for 6 years, not for much longer. The photographs began arriving on the secure server at 16:47. Keller and Varda went through them together. The fire mission authentication first, then the transmission log, then the journal entries. Varda's background gave her the analytical framework to move quickly, flagging the most operationally significant entries, building the structure of what the documentation proved in the language that a formal legal proceeding would require. They worked through the evening. The journal was not what Keller had expected. He had expected field notes, tactical observations, the cold functional record of someone conducting surveillance. What he found instead was something both more and less than that. Lena Cortez wrote with the compressed economy of someone trained to convey maximum information in minimum words. But behind the economy, behind the dates and coordinates and names and operational details, there was a person. She had written about the 7, about each of them specifically. Small details, the way a particular man had laughed at his own jokes even when nobody else did. The way another had kept a photograph in his helmet worn smooth at the edges from being handled during quiet hours. Details that had no tactical value and had been preserved anyway, carefully, the way you preserve something, because losing it completely is not something you are willing to do. Keller read those sections and said nothing. Varda read them and said nothing either. They were not the kind of sections that required words. At 1900, Theater Jag contacted FOB Harlow directly, not through the command net. A direct line to Ashford's office, which Ashford relayed to Varda with a brevity that suggested she had been expecting it. Theater Jag was sending a team. Arrival 0600 the following morning. At 2100 word came through Ashford that Brigadier General Warren Holt had been placed on administrative hold pending a theater-level investigation into potential violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. His command authority suspended. His access to communication systems restricted. Confined to quarters. It was not an arrest. Not yet. But it was the machinery starting. Keller sat in the communications section alone for a while after that. The PRC unit on the table in front of him. The sealed frequency open on the display. He held the handset for a long time before he pressed the button. Echo 7. He paused. It's done. Holt is on administrative hold. Jag arrives in the morning. Chen retrieved the documentation. All of it. It's in the system now outside anyone's ability to suppress. He paused again. It's going to take time. Investigations take time. But the record is going to reflect what actually happened. Greyhound is going to be opened. Another pause longer. You did this. 6 years of it. All of it. He stopped. He looked at the wall. I'd like very much to have this conversation somewhere other than a dead frequency. Static. He sat with it. Then the carrier wave. Low. As if the transmitting radio were running on nearly nothing, but present. She was there. Where? One word, and it was enough. F.O.B. Harlow, he said. Tomorrow after JAG arrives. You'd be a witness, not a suspect. Varda has already filed the documentation establishing your status as a surviving victim of the Greyhound incident. A pause. You'd be coming in as a witness with evidence, not as a ghost. A longer pause. That's a significant ask. I know. The last time I came in from the field, they erased me. The last time Holt was in a position to do that. Keller held the radio. He's not anymore. The people coming tomorrow morning have everything. Your documentation, the access logs, Carver's statement, my account, Varda's analysis. They're not coming to manage a narrative. They're coming because the narrative is already out and they have to respond to it. A pause. You've been alone with this for 6 years. You don't have to be anymore. The static held. The communications section was very quiet. Outside, the base had settled into its night rhythm. The muted constant of an installation that never fully slept. There are conditions, she said. He almost smiled. State them. The Greyhound personnel files are corrected. All 7. Official record reflects what actually happened, not the cover story. I'll make sure of it. The families are notified personally, not a form letter. Someone who knows what happened and can answer their questions. I'll be there for every one of them if that's what it takes. A pause. And I want my service record restored. You were a staff sergeant when Greyhound happened, he said. Based on your performance last night alone, the question of what rank you should hold after reinstatement is something I would personally advocate for in front of any board you want to put in front of me. Silence for a moment. Keller. Yes, I'm not doing this for reinstatement. The transmission was quiet, but clear. I'm doing this because 7 people deserve to have the truth on record. Because their families deserve to know their people didn't die for a mistake. Because... She stopped. The static held the incomplete sentence. Then, because I'm tired. The word landed quietly and with enormous weight. Not the tiredness of exhaustion, though there was surely that. 6 years of mountain winters and solitude, and the particular grinding fatigue of carrying something no one around you can see. It was the tiredness of a person who has maintained a vigil for so long that the vigil has become indistinguishable from who they are and who is ready perhaps for the first time to put it down. Come in, Keller said. Let someone else carry it for a while. A long silence, the carrier wave holding. Oh, 600, she said. When Jag arrives, I'll be at the gate. A pause. Don't make a thing of it, just the gate, nobody else. And coffee, he said. A pause. Then, done. The channel clicked. He sat with the static for a moment longer, keeping the frequency open the way he had on the helicopter flight back. Then he set the handset down and sat back, and let the silence sit with him for a while. Chen returned at 22:30 with the Pelican case, and a look on his face that would require a long time and probably several drinks to fully articulate. He set the case on the table without comment. Keller logged it into evidence, and they sat in the communications section without saying much which seemed appropriate. Torres came by at 2300. She stood in the doorway and looked at the case and looked at Keller. Tomorrow, he said. Oh, 600. She's coming in. Something moved through Torres's expression. Not surprise. A kind of deep, sustained relief. The relief of someone who had been hoping for an outcome and had not been sure of it until now. "Does she know what she's walking into?" Torres asked. "She knows better than any of us," he said. Torres nodded. She looked at the case one more time. "I'll be at the gate," she said. "I told her just me." "I heard you." Torres looked at him. "I'll be at the gate anyway. She can tell me to leave if she wants." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "All right," he said. Torres left. Chen sat at his terminal and said nothing, and the communication section was quiet, and the base was quiet, and somewhere in the mountains to the northeast, in whatever shelter she had maintained for 6 years, through winter, and surveillance and solitude, and the particular discipline of someone who understood that the case had to be airtight before it could be opened, Lena Cortez was either already moving toward the base or was preparing to move at first light. Keller thought about the trench again. About the moment he had pressed the transmit button on a dead frequency with 18 people behind him and 40 enemy soldiers closing and nothing left. About the 4 words that had come back through the static. Calm as stone. Waiting. He thought about what it cost to answer a call like that. Not the tactical cost, the other kind. The cost of stepping out of 6 years of carefully maintained invisibility and saying, "I hear you and I can help. And here are my conditions," and then delivering on every single one of them in the dark in a blizzard against impossible odds. He thought about what she had said on the helicopter frequency, the small shift in the noise that might have been a transmit button pressed and held for exactly 1 second by someone who wanted to say something and decided in the end not to say it. He picked up the handset one last time. "I'll be at the gate at 0600, he said to the open frequency. "Coffee, no sugar, if I remember your record correctly." A pause. "And for the record, I think you're going to be fine. All of it. The transition, the process, the being around people again. I think you're going to be fine." He released the button. Static. "Sleep if you can." He set the handset down. Outside, the sky above the mountains was beginning to do the thing it did in the hour before dawn. The dark becoming something other than dark, something that was not yet light, but had decided to become it. The stars at the eastern horizon had started their recession, pulling back in front of something that was coming, whether they were ready or not. Keller looked at it for a moment. Then he went to find a cot, because the next several hours were going to require him to be a functioning human being, and he had approximately 4 hours to work with. It would have to be enough. The JAG team arrived at 0550, 10 minutes ahead of schedule, which JAG teams tended to do because they were lawyers, and lawyers manage time as a professional courtesy to themselves. 4 of them stepping off a helicopter onto the medevac pad with the purposeful efficiency of people who understood exactly why they were there and were prepared for it. 2 attorneys, an investigator, a documentation specialist. Ashford met them at the pad. Keller stood at the main gate with Torres and 2 cups of coffee that were already going cold in the morning air. The sky was the dark gray of very early winter dawn, the stars fading at the edges. The mountains in the distance, a black shape against a slightly lighter sky. 600 came. 6:05. Torres said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing when saying nothing was the appropriate response to a situation. 610. Keller was looking at the road that led from the mountain pass to the gate. The same road Chen had driven yesterday. The same road that fed down from the terrain where the box canyon was, where Firebase Kestrel had been, where the night had started in a frozen trench with ammunition running out and a radio that reached nothing. A vehicle appeared at the far end of the road, moving slowly. Not the pace of a vehicle with a specific destination and a schedule. The pace of something navigating carefully. Approaching something it had been away from for a long time and was not entirely sure how to approach. The vehicle stopped 50 meters from the gate. A figure got out. She was not what Keller had assembled in his mind from the photograph in the personnel file and the voice on the frequency. Or she was but the photograph, and the voice hadn't been enough information. She was compact and dark-haired, and moved with the particular economy of someone whose body had been maintained as a tool for a long time. She was wearing civilian clothes that were clearly field-functional, and she was carrying nothing except a pack over one shoulder and the long case of a rifle that she set down against the vehicle before she walked toward the gate. She stopped 10 feet away. She looked at Keller, then at Torres, then back at Keller. "I said just you," she said. "She wouldn't leave," Keller said. A beat. Torres held out a coffee cup. Lena Cortez looked at it for a moment. Something moved through her face, a ripple in the controlled surface. There and gone. She took the cup. She wrapped both hands around it and looked at the base through the gate. At the lights and the structures and the flag above the command building, catching the first movement of the morning wind. 6 years, she said. To no one in particular. Yes, Keller said. She was quiet for a moment, drinking the coffee, looking at the base, with the expression of someone returning to a language they haven't spoken in a long time, testing whether it still fits in their mouth. How's Hicks? She said. They saved the arm, Torres said. He's going to physical therapy in about 6 weeks. He specifically requested someone who won't let him quit. Lena looked at Torres. You're Sergeant Torres, she said. How do you... I've been listening to your unit for a while. She almost smiled. You have a good voice for radio. Clear. Torres looked at her for a moment, then looked at Keller, then back at Lena. Thank you, Torres said, for all of it. Lena looked at the coffee in her hands. The almost smile faded into something quieter and more complex. The expression of someone who has been thanked for something they did not do for the purpose of being thanked. The JAG team is inside, Keller said. Ashford's hosting them in the conference room. Varda has the documentation organized. He paused. When you're ready. She looked up at him. Keller? Yes. The 7. She held his gaze. Their families first, before any of the institutional process, before the filings and the hearings and the record corrections. The families first. Agreed. I want to be there when they're told. I'll make sure of it. She nodded. She turned to look at the mountains one more time, the dark shapes of the ridge lines against the lightening sky. The high terrain she had moved through alone for 6 years, the landscape that had hidden her and sheltered her and given her the distance from which to watch and record and wait. She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned back to the gate. All right, she said. Let's go then. What followed was not clean or fast or cinematically satisfying in the way that the previous 36 hours had been. Institutional accountability never is. It is paperwork and depositions and careful procedural language and months of process that move with the deliberate pace of a system correcting itself, which bears no relationship to the pace of the events that made correction necessary. But it moved. The JAG team spent 4 hours with Lena that first morning. Keller knew this because he sat outside the conference room for most of it, which was not required of him and which he did anyway. Torres found him there at the 2-hour mark, sat down beside him without comment, and stayed. At one point through the closed door, they heard Lena's voice rise briefly, not in volume, but in intensity. A single sentence delivered with the compressed force of someone who has been holding a specific truth for 6 years and is finally placing it in front of people with the authority to act on it. Then it went quiet again. The flat, controlled cadence resumed. Torres looked at him. He looked at the door. Neither of them said anything. At 1100, the JAG lead attorney came out and asked Keller to come in. He went in. Lena was sitting at the conference table with both hands flat on the surface in front of her, the posture of someone who has been doing something very difficult for a long time and is holding form through the tail end of it. She looked at him when he entered. Something in her face had changed. Not softened exactly. Something more precise than that. Something that had been wound very tight for a very long time had been allowed in the last 4 hours to release one careful degree. Captain Keller, the JAG lead said, Sergeant Cortez has provided a comprehensive account corroborated in full by the documentation retrieved from the secondary LZ location. The fire mission authentication and transmission records are consistent with her account in every verifiable detail. He paused. General Holt's authentication code appears on documents that establish his direct command authority over the Greyhound fire mission. The transmission log establishes that he was informed of the recon team's presence in the strike grid 31 minutes prior to authorizing the strike. Another pause. This is sufficient to proceed. Keller looked at Lena. How are you doing? He said. She considered the question with the seriousness of someone who understood it was not rhetorical. I'm still here, she said. That's something. It's a lot, he said. Warren Holt was formally charged 11 days after JAG arrived at FOB Harlow. The charges included dereliction of duty, obstruction of justice, and violations of the UCMJ relating to the unlawful targeting of friendly forces during Operation Greyhound. His star was suspended pending the proceedings. The proceedings took 9 months. Keller attended every session he was permitted to attend. He sat in the same row as Varda, who had submitted her own formal account of the access log evidence and its chain of custody, documented with the methodical thoroughness of an intelligence officer who had decided that if she was going to do something, she was going to do it in a way that could not be undone. On the day Holt took his seat at the defendant's table, Keller watched the man's face and found that the geniality was entirely gone. What was left was simply a man at the end of 31 years of institutional authority sitting in a room where that authority had finally run out of runway. It was not satisfying in the way that the night in the mountains had been. Nothing about the proceedings was satisfying in that way. But it was real, and it was moving, and it was not stopping. At the end of the 9 months, the star was removed. Major Carver cooperated fully with the investigation. His cooperation was a matter of record, and the investigation noted it. What resulted from that notation was a legal and institutional outcome that was less than what full accountability might have demanded, and more than what would have happened if he had not walked toward the legal section that morning. He spent considerable time examining that arithmetic. It was, by all accounts, not a comfortable examination, but it was an honest one, which was more than he had managed for the previous 4 years, and it was where he was starting from. The 7 Greyhound personnel were formally and publicly recognized 11 weeks after Jag's arrival. The ceremony was small, not by design, but because the families, when contacted, had asked for something small. Something that was about their people rather than about the institution correcting itself. Keller attended. Torres attended. Varda attended. Lena Cortez attended, and she stood at the side of the room and said nothing during the ceremony, except when she spoke directly to each family, which she did quietly and specifically. She told each one something particular about the person they had lost. Something that only someone who had been there could tell them. The way a particular man had laughed at his own jokes even when nobody else did. The way another had kept a photograph in his helmet worn smooth at the edges from being handled during quiet hours. Details that had been preserved for 6 years in a handwritten journal in a waterproof case behind the third boulder from the west end of a canyon wall, preserved because losing them completely was not something she had been willing to do. Several of the families asked her why she had waited so long. She told each of them the same thing. "I wasn't waiting," she said. "I was preparing." The difference between waiting and preparing is that waiting is passive and preparation is not. I was building the case every day for 6 years, making sure that when the moment came, nothing could be suppressed or dismissed or managed away. One of the mothers, a woman in her 60s who had driven 14 hours to be at that ceremony, took Lena's hand in both of hers and held it for a moment and said nothing. Lena stood very still and did not pull away. After a moment, she put her other hand over the woman's and held on. Torres, watching from across the room, turned away and looked at the wall for a while. Lena Cortez was reinstated to active service in the month following the Greyhound recognition ceremony. The board that reviewed her case moved quickly, which boards did not typically do, and the speed was attributable to several factors, including the documentation she had provided, the testimony of Captain Keller, and the assessment filed by Colonel Ashford, who had spent considerable time in the intervening weeks reading everything, and had arrived at conclusions she committed to paper with the same precision she brought to everything. The rank question was addressed at the board with the directness that the documentation warranted. The board noted in its findings that the performance record preceding Greyhound had been exceptional, that the 6-year period following Greyhound, while unofficial, had produced intelligence and tactical support that contributed directly to the survival of 18 military personnel, that the skill level demonstrated throughout warranted recognition that reflected the reality of what the record showed, rather than the fiction of what it had been made to say. The rank offered was Sergeant Major. Lena sat in the boardroom and looked at the document for a long moment before she signed it. The officer who handed it to her said, "Is the rank acceptable?" She looked at him. "The rank is fine," she said. "I want to know what unit." 3 weeks later, Keller was in his office at his permanent assignment when the knock came at the door. "Come in," he said. The door opened. He looked up. She was in uniform, which he had not yet seen. The uniform changed things slightly. Not her bearing, which was the same. Not the particular quality of her stillness, which was unchanged. But it made her simultaneously more familiar and more strange, the institutional language of it, sitting on the person he had first encountered as a voice in a blizzard. She sat in the chair across from his desk. "Sergeant Major," he said. "Captain," she said. They looked at each other for a moment. "How's the transition?" he asked. "Strange." She looked at the wall. Everything moves slowly compared to the mountains. Everything moves slowly compared to... She stopped. People talk a lot. They do. In the mountains, things are very clear. You have a problem, and you solve it, and you move. She paused. Here, everything takes 4 meetings and a memo. "Welcome back." She almost smiled. The almost smile he had seen at the gate, the one that arrived and departed quickly, still learning to stay. "I've been assigned to the recon training unit," she said. "Apparently there's a skills gap in long-range precision work, and someone with my profile is considered a useful resource." A pause. "I'm going to be teaching." "Good. I've never taught anyone anything in my life." "You taught 18 people to survive a blizzard by following a voice on a dead frequency," he said. She looked at him. "That's different." "Is it?" She was quiet for a moment. She looked at his desk, at the organized stacks of paperwork that represented the ongoing administrative life of a military career. He could see her assessing the landscape of it, the geography of an institutional existence, ordinary and constrained, and nothing like a ridgeline with a clear angle of fire and 40 enemy soldiers below. "Are you going to be all right?" he said. "With the transition, all of it." She considered the question the way she considered everything, without rushing it. "I don't know," she said. It was simple and without drama. "I know how to be alone in the mountains. I know how to move and observe and wait and act at exactly the right moment. I know how to keep people alive when the only tools available are a rifle and a radio." She paused. "I don't know how to be this." A gesture that encompassed the uniform and the rank and the institution and the ordinary day around them. "I used to. I'll have to learn it again." "You will." "You sound certain." "You spent 6 years alone in the mountains conducting a one-person intelligence operation against a general officer who had the entire institutional machinery of the military on his side," Keller said. "And you won. I have reasonable confidence in your ability to figure out a training curriculum." She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her, the kind that doesn't have time to be controlled before it happens. It changed her face completely. Not into something unrecognizable, but into something that was the same person with a different layer visible. A layer that had been present all along, but sealed off by 6 years of solitude and vigilance, and the specific emotional discipline required to do what she had done. It was the laugh of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and has put it down and discovered that her hands are still there. "All right," she said. She stood. She looked at him with the directness that was simply the way she looked at everything. Without the social performance of managed eye contact. Without the strategic ambiguity of people who had learned to say more with what they didn't show than what they did. Just direct, clear, present. "Thank you," she said. "For the frequency." He shook his head. "You answered." "You called?" They looked at each other across the desk. "If you need anything," he said. "The transition, the training unit, any of it. I know where to find you." She moved toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. "Keller?" "Yes." "The frequency." She looked back at him. "Keep the hardware." He looked at her. "In case someone needs it," she said. She left. He sat in his office for a long time after that, in the ordinary silence of an ordinary afternoon, and he thought about dead frequencies and live ones, and the thin line between them, and about the particular kind of courage required not to fire a weapon, or breach a perimeter, or hold a position under fire, but to answer. To simply answer, when everything in a reasonable person's calculation says the call is coming from somewhere you cannot afford to be, and the cost of answering is everything you have, and you answer anyway. Lena Cortez had not survived 6 years in the mountains, waiting for someone to rescue her. She had spent 6 years building the conditions under which rescue would be possible, and then she had executed the final phase of a 6-year operation, with the same cold precision she had brought to every other phase, guiding 18 people out of a kill zone in a blizzard, holding 40 enemy soldiers at bay with nothing but skill and terrain and the willingness to stand alone between the living and the people trying to make them otherwise. She had done it for 7 people who couldn't do it for themselves anymore. She had done it for their families who deserved a truth they had been deliberately denied. She had done it because the record was wrong, and the record being wrong was something she had decided 6 years ago in a frozen mountain theater with her team dead around her was not something she was willing to leave alone. And when the call finally came through the static, when a captain she had never met pressed a transmit button on a dead frequency in a frozen trench with nothing left and everything to lose, she had answered. Not because the odds were good, not because the cost was manageable, but because some things are worth answering for. And Lena Cortez had always known the difference between the things that were and the things that weren't. The sealed frequency handset sat on his desk. The battery still live. The channel still accessible to anyone who knew the override and had the hardware and was desperate enough or principled enough or both to reach for it in the dark. He left it there. Because somewhere out there in some frozen trench or burning firebase or mountain valley, where the radio reached nothing and the ammunition was running out and the options were down to the last one, somebody else might need it, and when they called, he intended for it to answer.